Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I gripped the knife tightly, my heart hammering against my ribs as I pressed myself into the corner of the pantry. The small space smelled of spices and stale bread, but all I could focus on were the slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the house. Each step was careful, measured, as if whoever had entered knew I was inside. I held my breath, straining to hear any clues that might tell me who or what I was dealing with. The footsteps paused in the living room, and I imagined the intruder scanning the space, searching. I had locked that door, I was certain of it, but someone had gotten in without breaking anything. My phone was on the coffee table, useless to me now, leaving me with no way to call for help. The only thing I had was the knife in my trembling hand. A floorboard creaked closer to the kitchen, and my stomach clenched. The pantry door had a simple handle, nothing that locked, meaning I wasn't as hidden as I wanted to be. I pressed my back against the shelves, feeling the boxes shift against me as I tried to make myself smaller. The steps stopped right outside the pantry door, and for a moment, there was only silence. The handle turned slightly, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to make a sound. The door didn't open immediately, as if the person on the other side was debating whether to check inside. I bit my lip, my pulse roaring in my ears as the seconds stretched on. Then, slowly, the handle twisted all the way, and the door creaked open. I lunged forward without thinking, the knife aimed in front of me as I shoved out of the pantry. I collided with something solid, knocking them backward with the force of my movement. A sharp intake of breath filled the air as my knife barely missed its target. My own gasp followed when I saw the face of the person standing in my kitchen. It wasn't a stranger, it was my brother. His wide eyes locked onto mine, confusion flashing across his face. He was holding his hands up, stepping back cautiously as he tried to process what had just happened. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with shock. I was shaking too much to respond immediately, still gripping the knife in my hand. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to understand what was happening. I thought someone broke in, I finally stammered. My mind was struggling to keep up with the fear still coursing through me. His eyebrows knitted together, and he gestured toward the door. "I used my key," he said slowly, as if speaking to a scared animal. "I told you last week I was stopping by to grab my stuff." My stomach twisted as I tried to recall the conversation, but my brain was still stuck in survival mode. I swallowed hard, feeling the embarrassment creep in as the adrenaline wore off. "I forgot," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the knife in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous, and I set it down on the counter with shaking fingers. My legs felt weak, and I leaned against the counter to steady myself. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he studied me. "You really thought someone broke in, huh?" His voice had softened, but there was something else there too, concern, maybe. He took a step closer, eyeing the knife before glancing back at me. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes, to brush it off as a simple misunderstanding, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. My body was still tense, my hands trembling despite knowing I was safe now. "I don't know," I admitted, swallowing the lump in my throat. The fear had been too real, too sharp, and it wasn't fading as quickly as I wanted it to. He nodded slowly, then reached out, his hand hesitating before squeezing my shoulder. "Maybe you should get a better lock," he suggested, half joking but not entirely. His attempt to lighten the mood didn't quite work, but I appreciated the effort. I forced a shaky exhale, nodding. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my face. "Maybe I should." The exhaustion settled over me all at once, the leftover panic leaving my body drained. My brother grabbed a drink from the fridge, still watching me as he took a sip. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, he sighed, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I should have knocked first." There was guilt in his voice, though it wasn't really his fault. I had worked myself into a panic before even considering another explanation. I managed a weak smile, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "It's fine," I murmured, though I wasn't sure I completely believed it yet. The fear still lingered in my chest, a reminder of how quickly everything could feel unsafe. I knew it would take time to shake the feeling. He hesitated before picking up a bag near the door, slinging it over his shoulder. "I'll text you next time before coming over," he said. "So, you don't, you know." He nodded toward the knife on the counter, his expression unreadable. I let out a breath that was half a laugh, half relief. "Yeah, good idea," I muttered. He gave me one last look before heading out, the door clicking shut behind him. The house was silent again, but the eerie weight of what had just happened still clung to the air. I turned to the pantry, staring at the space where I had hidden just minutes before. My heartbeat had finally started to slow, but the fear still whispered in the back of my mind. Even though I was safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching. That, for a brief moment, I hadn't been alone in the house after all. Story 2. I started noticing small things in my apartment being moved. Drawers were slightly open when I knew I had closed them. My toothbrush was damp even though I hadn't used it. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had been absent-minded. Then it started happening more often. My shoes weren't where I left them, and the TV was on a different channel than I had last watched. The kitchen cabinets were sometimes ajar, even though I always made sure to shut them tightly. A creeping unease settled in my chest, but I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. One evening I set a small object on the table and took a picture of it with my phone. Hours later, when I returned, the object had shifted slightly. I checked my photo and confirmed it wasn't my imagination. The realization sent a shiver through me, and I locked my bedroom door that night. Days passed, and the disturbances continued. My windows remained locked, my front door secured, yet things still moved. I started double-checking everything before bed, making sure there was no way for anyone to enter unnoticed. Despite my precautions, I still woke up every morning to find something out of place. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of my closet door creaking open. My breath hitched as I stared into the darkness, frozen in place. I had shut that door before going to sleep, I was sure of it. My heart pounded as I strained to hear any movement inside. The air in the room felt thick with something unseen. I forced myself to sit up, reaching for my phone to use as a flashlight. As the soft glow illuminated the closet, my stomach twisted. The door was now slightly ajar, revealing only pitch-black emptiness beyond. I swallowed hard and slowly got out of bed. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle, bracing myself for whatever was inside. With a quick motion, I yanked the door fully open. My closet was empty, just as it always had been. Despite the apparent normalcy, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I checked the small space thoroughly, pushing aside clothes and looking at the floor. Nothing seemed disturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I shut the door tightly and returned to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I noticed scratches on the inside of the closet door. They weren't deep, but they were new. I would have noticed them before. A cold dread settled in my chest as I traced the jagged lines. It was as if someone had been clawing at the door from the inside. I decided to set up my phone to record while I slept. That night I placed it on my nightstand, angled toward the closet. My body was tense as I lay in bed, trying to ignore the anxious thumping of my heartbeat. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning I hesitated before checking the recording. My stomach churned as I pressed play, watching the stillness of my darkened room. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional shift of my blankets. Then, around 3 a.m., the closet door creaked open on its own. I watched in horrified silence as the door slowly swung outward. My sleeping form remained unaware of what was happening. Then, just at the edge of the frame, something moved inside the darkness of the closet. A shadow subtle, shifting almost human in shape. My entire body tensed as I rewound the footage and watched again. The shape never fully emerged, but I could see it there, lingering. I could feel it watching me as I slept, just feet away. My stomach twisted violently as panic settled deep in my bones. I didn't stay in my apartment that night. I packed a bag and left, booking a hotel room across town. Lying in a foreign bed, I struggled to calm my racing mind. The thought of something being in my apartment, something unseen, something aware, made my skin crawl. The next day, I contacted my landlord and asked if the apartment had any history. He seemed surprised by my question but admitted that the previous tenant had left suddenly. He didn't provide many details, only that they broke their lease without explanation. His evasiveness only deepened my unease. I returned to the apartment during the day to collect more of my things. The atmosphere inside felt heavy, like the air was pressing down on me. I moved quickly, keeping an ear out for any sounds. Every creak of the floor made my heart pound. As I reached for my coat in the closet, I noticed something tucked into the back corner. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. With shaky hands, I pulled it out and unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were the words, "It watches when you sleep." A chill ran down my spine as I dropped the note. My instincts screamed for me to leave, and I obeyed without hesitation. I grabbed only the essentials and left the rest behind. I didn't care about breaking my lease, I just needed to be far away. I moved into a new apartment across the city, one with no history, no strange occurrences. But even now, I sleep with the lights on. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I think I hear a creaking sound. My breath catches, and my pulse races. Then I remind myself I locked my closet door. Story 3. A strange man had been following me home from work every night. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but after a week, I couldn't ignore the pattern. He always lingered just far enough behind that I couldn't get a clear look at his face. Each time I turned a corner, he did too, always keeping pace. I started walking faster, hoping to shake him off, but he never seemed to fall behind. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but those few blocks had never felt so long. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was there, never stopping, never getting closer, just watching. It made my skin crawl, but I told myself I was imagining things. One evening I decided to test him and crossed the street unexpectedly. He hesitated for a moment, then followed, making my stomach turn. My heart pounded as I turned down an alley, hoping to lose him. When I emerged on the next street, I looked back and saw him standing at the alley's entrance, unmoving. I rushed home, locked the door, and double-checked the windows. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but I hesitated. What could I even tell the police? That a man was following me but had never actually done anything. I convinced myself it was paranoia and went to bed, though sleep never came easily. The next night, I took a different route home, weaving through side streets and cutting through a small park. For the first time in days, I didn't see him. Relief washed over me as I reached my apartment, thinking maybe I had finally lost him. But when I stepped up to my door, my breath caught in my throat. A single piece of paper was taped there, the message written in neat, deliberate letters. I saw that. The word sent a chill straight through me, and I felt my legs go weak. He knew I had tried to lose him. He knew exactly where I lived. My stomach twisted as I ripped the note off the door and hurried inside. I locked everything and turned off all the lights, pressing my back against the wall as I tried to steady my breathing. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Calling the police seemed useless when he hadn't technically broken any laws. I didn't even have proof he was the one who left the note. The next morning, I left for work earlier than usual, scanning the street for any sign of him. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I spent the day distracted, barely able to focus, my eyes constantly flicking to the windows. Every shadow outside made my heart pound. That night, I considered taking an Uber home, but I didn't want him to see me get into a car. Instead, I walked as quickly as I could, avoiding dark areas and keeping my phone in my hand. I didn't see him on the way back, but that did nothing to ease my nerves. When I reached my door, I hesitated before unlocking it, half expecting another note. There was nothing there, but I still felt uneasy. I locked myself inside and sat near the door, listening for any sounds outside. Minutes stretched into hours, and every small creak of the building made me flinch. When exhaustion finally took over, I fell into an uneasy sleep, still clutching my phone. The next few days passed without incident, and I almost let myself believe it was over. But then, one evening I found another note waiting for me. "You're getting careless." My blood ran cold as I gripped the paper, my hands trembling. He had been watching me the whole time. Panic surged through me, and I rushed inside, my heart hammering. This wasn't just some random stalker. He was methodical, deliberate, and patient. I felt like a mouse trapped in a cage, being toyed with before the inevitable. I couldn't stay here, not if he knew my every move. I packed a bag and called a friend, asking if I could stay with them for a while. They agreed, sensing the urgency in my voice. I left that night, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Every sound sent my heart racing. At my friend's apartment, I finally let myself breathe. I explained everything, and they insisted I call the police. I knew it was the right thing to do, but a deep part of me feared it wouldn't matter. He had done nothing they could act on, and if he found out I reported him, things could escalate. The officer who took my report was polite but unconvinced. Without security footage or evidence, there was little they could do. I asked if they could patrol my street, and they agreed, but I knew that wouldn't stop him. He was too careful, too patient. For the next week, I didn't go home. My friend's apartment was safe, but I felt like I was just waiting. Then, one night, I got a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide forever." My breath hitched as I stared at the screen. He had my number now. Fear clawed at my throat as I deleted the message and blocked the number. I didn't know how he got it, but it didn't matter. He was proving a point. No matter where I went, he could find me. The walls of safety I had built around myself crumbled. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing through possibilities. Running wouldn't help. Hiding wouldn't stop him. I needed to do something drastic, something that would make him stop. But what if it only made things worse? Morning came, and with it a new resolve. I couldn't live in fear forever. I went back to my apartment, determined to gather my things and find somewhere new to live. As I unlocked the door, I hesitated, a sinking feeling settling in my gut. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt off, like someone had been there. My hands shook as I moved through the apartment, searching for any sign of disturbance. That's when I saw it. A single note, placed carefully on my kitchen counter. Welcome home. Story 4. I was showering when I heard my front door open and close. My roommate wasn't supposed to be home. I turned off the water, heart pounding, and listened heavy breathing just outside the bathroom door. The steam clung to my skin as I stood frozen, my mind racing. I strained to hear anything else, but the apartment was eerily silent. The breathing on the other side of the door remained steady, deliberate. I reached for a towel, my movements slow and careful. My phone was in my bedroom, useless to me now. Swallowing hard, I debated whether to call out or stay silent. The doorknob rattled, and I nearly lost my footing on the wet tile. Whoever was out there was testing the lock. My breath hitched as I pressed my back against the cold wall. Seconds stretched into eternity as I waited for the next move. The handle turned again, this time with more force. I silently cursed myself for never fixing the faulty lock. A low exhale came from the other side, almost like a sigh of frustration. My stomach twisted in fear as I realized they weren't leaving. Instead, they were waiting. I tightened my grip on the towel, feeling exposed and helpless. My mind raced through possible escape routes, but there was only one way out the door. I had no idea who or what was waiting for me. A sharp knock made me flinch, my body jolting against the tile. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. The silence returned, stretching thick and suffocating. I forced myself to breathe, inhaling through my nose to steady my nerves. Maybe it was my roommate after all, coming home early without warning. But something in my gut told me that wasn't true. Another knock, louder this time, sent my pulse into overdrive. I reached for the shower curtain rod, yanking it free in a desperate attempt to arm myself. The cheap metal felt useless in my trembling hands. The breathing grew heavier, more labored. A slow, dragging sound followed, as if something was being pushed across the floor. My chest tightened as I imagined all the worst possibilities. I had to act. Staying inside meant waiting to be cornered. Clenching the towel around me, I positioned myself near the door, gripping the rod like a bat. I took a shaky breath and turned the knob just enough to peek through the crack. The dim hallway light cast long shadows, but no one stood directly outside. The living room beyond was still and quiet. I listened for movement, but only silence greeted me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I debated my next move. I could rush out and make a break for the front door, but what if they were waiting just out of sight? I swallowed my fear and pushed the door open an inch more. My skin prickled as I stepped forward, forcing myself into the open. My bare feet met the cold tile as I scanned the apartment. The front door was closed, locked just as I had left it. My lungs ached from holding my breath as I inched forward. The living room appeared untouched, no signs of forced entry, no signs of anyone at all. I stepped farther into the apartment, gripping the curtain rod tighter. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, though I knew I had closed it earlier. A wave of dread rolled over me. A creak from inside my bedroom made my blood run cold. Someone was in there. My stomach clenched as I realized I had two choices: run or fight. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out while I could. But if I ran, I would have to turn my back. If they were already inside, they could be anywhere. The sound of something shifting inside my room made my decision for me. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. My hands shook violently as I yanked it open. I didn't look back as I ran barefoot into the hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs as I sprinted toward the stairwell. Every sound, every shadow felt like it was closing in on me. I reached the lobby and crashed through the door, gasping for air. The cool night air hit my damp skin, but I barely felt it. My legs trembled as I turned back toward the building. My apartment window was dark, no sign of movement inside. Had I imagined it? Had my mind played tricks on me? But the heavy breathing had been real, I knew it had. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my fingers barely working. The operator's voice grounded me as I stammered out what had happened. They assured me officers were on their way. Minutes stretched endlessly as I waited outside. The sound of approaching sirens sent a wave of relief through me. 2 officers entered the building while another stayed with me, asking questions. They searched the apartment thoroughly, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints on the damp bathroom floor. It was as if no one had ever been there. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that stress or exhaustion had tricked my mind, but I knew better. The rattling doorknob, the slow breathing, it had been real. One of the officers lingered, watching me closely. "Are you sure you locked the door when you got home?" he asked. I nodded, my throat dry. He exchanged a glance with his partner before speaking again. "We didn't find anyone, but we did find something." My stomach twisted as I waited for him to continue. He held up a small, crumpled piece of paper, his expression grim. "It was on your bed." I took it with shaky hands, my breath hitching as I read the single sentence scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I like watching you." Ah. Story 5. Living alone had always been peaceful, but that morning, something felt off. A chill ran down my spine as I realized my bedroom window was wide open. I never left it open at night, and I knew I had locked it before going to bed. The unsettling thought that someone had been inside my apartment made my hands tremble as I sat up. I rushed to check my front door, but it was still locked, the chain secured just as I had left it. My heart pounded as I slowly walked back to my room, scanning every corner for anything unusual. Everything seemed untouched: my nightstand, the small lamp, even my phone exactly where I had placed it. But the open window told me otherwise, and I felt sick knowing someone had been here. Grabbing my phone, I opened the security app linked to my bedroom camera. I had installed it months ago out of caution, never expecting to see anything unusual. As I scrolled through the footage from the night before, my stomach twisted into knots. A timestamp showed movement at 3:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours after I had fallen asleep. I hesitated before pressing play, already feeling a deep sense of dread. The screen showed my sleeping form, still and unaware, while the room remained dark. Then, a shadow moved into view, and my breath caught in my throat. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, completely still, just watching me. But for nearly a full minute, the figure didn't move, as if studying me. Then, slowly, he stepped closer, barely making a sound as he reached the side of my bed. I watched in horror as he stood over me, his head slightly tilting, as if examining my face. My mind raced with questions. How had he gotten in? What had he been planning to do? The footage showed him standing there for nearly 10 minutes, unmoving except for the occasional tilt of his head. My skin crawled as I imagined waking up to see him looming over me. He had been close enough to touch me, close enough to hear my breathing. Yet, at some point, he simply turned and walked to the window, opening it before climbing out. My entire body trembled as I shut off the video, unable to watch anymore. The violation of my space, the fact that someone had been inches away from me as I slept, was too much to process. My hands felt clammy as I dialed the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. They told me an officer would be dispatched immediately and advised me not to touch anything. I paced the living room, my mind replaying the footage over and over. There was no sign of forced entry, and my front door had remained locked. That meant he had entered and exited through the window, but that still didn't explain how he had gotten inside in the first place. My stomach twisted at the realization that he could have been in my apartment before I had even gone to bed. The knock on the door made me jump, and I hurried to open it. A uniformed officer stood there, his expression serious as I let him in. I showed him the footage, my hands shaking as I held up my phone. He watched it in silence, his jaw tightening as the hooded figure came into view. After the video ended, the officer asked if anything had been stolen or if I had noticed anything missing. I shook my head, but that only made the situation more disturbing. If he hadn't taken anything, then why had he been there? The idea that he had just wanted to watch me sleep made my skin crawl. The officer inspected the window, checking the lock before glancing outside. He pointed out faint scuff marks on the windowsill, likely from the intruder climbing in and out. He then walked around the apartment, making sure no other signs of entry were present. His expression remained unreadable, but I could tell he was concerned. He asked if I had noticed anyone following me in the past few days, any strangers hanging around the building. I tried to think, but nothing stood out, no lingering figures, no unfamiliar faces. Everything had seemed normal until this morning. The officer took notes before promising to have patrols keep an eye on the area. After he left, I sat on the couch, still shaken. I double-checked every lock, even placing the chair under the doorknob for extra security. The thought of trying to sleep again felt impossible, my mind refusing to let go of what had happened. Every noise outside made me flinch. Every shadow felt like someone watching. Hours passed, but the fear remained heavy in my chest. I checked the footage again, trying to see if I had missed any details. The man's face remained hidden under the hood, his features completely obscured. There was no way to tell who he was or what he had been thinking. The police followed up later that day, but there were no leads. My neighbors hadn't seen anything unusual, and there were no signs of forced entry anywhere else in the building. The officer suggested getting a better security system and making sure my windows stayed locked at all times. He also warned me to be cautious, just in case the man tried to return. That night, I barely slept, every creak of the apartment making my heart race. I kept my phone in my hand, the security feed open, ready to check at the slightest noise. The fear of waking up to find the window open again kept me on edge. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hooded figure standing over me. Days passed, but the unease never faded. I installed extra locks, changed my routine, and became hyper-aware of my surroundings. But even with the precautions, I still felt unsafe. The knowledge that someone had been inside my home while I slept was something I could never forget. Even now, I check my bedroom window every night, making sure it's locked. I avoid sleeping too deeply, afraid I won't wake up if something happens again. No matter how much time passes, the memory of that figure standing over me lingers. I don't know who he was, and I don't know if he'll ever come back. But the thought that he might is something I can never shake. Story 6. My daughter had always been an imaginative child, prone to telling me about the monsters under her bed or the shadows that moved in her room at night. When she started saying she saw a man standing outside our house, I assumed it was another one of her stories. Every night she would mention him, her little voice filled with worry as she pointed toward the window. I reassured her it was nothing and tucked her into bed, promising that she was safe. One evening, as I was locking up for the night, I hesitated by the front window. My daughter's words echoed in my mind, and I found myself pulling back the curtain to glance outside. The street was empty, the soft glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. There was no one there, just the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling in for the night. With a shake of my head, I turned away, convinced she had simply imagined it. The next morning at breakfast, she asked if I had seen him too. Her wide eyes searched my face, waiting for confirmation that she wasn't just making things up. I told her I hadn't seen anything, and that she shouldn't worry, but she only frowned and pushed her cereal around with her spoon. I tried to brush it off, but a small knot of unease settled in my stomach. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with a book, trying to distract myself. A strange feeling crept over me, an awareness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I glanced toward the window again, my heart pounding as I debated whether to look outside. Slowly I approached and peeked through the blinds, but again the street was empty. Days passed, and my daughter continued to insist the man was there. She would wake up in the middle of the night, crying that she had seen him again, always standing in the same spot. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a dream or a trick of the light, but her fear never faded, and I could see the exhaustion creeping into her little face. Eventually, I decided to check the security camera footage just to ease her mind. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulling up the recordings from the past few nights. At first, there was nothing, just the stillness of our quiet street, the occasional car passing by. Then, as I skipped through the footage, my breath caught in my throat. There he was. A tall figure stood at the edge of our front yard, just beyond the glow of the porch light. He didn't move, didn't shift, he only stood there, watching. My fingers trembled as I fast-forwarded through the footage, but he remained there for hours before finally disappearing just before dawn. I felt sick as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. I checked the recordings from previous nights, and my stomach twisted. He had been there every night, standing in the exact same place. Some nights he would take a few steps closer to the house, his shadow stretching toward the porch. Other nights he barely moved at all, just a dark silhouette against the empty street. A deep sense of dread settled in my chest as I turned off the laptop and rubbed my hands over my face. I had dismissed my daughter's fears, ignored her warnings. Now, I realized she had been telling the truth all along. I felt a crushing guilt as I thought about how scared she must have been, knowing I didn't believe her. That night, I kept the security feed open on my laptop as I sat in the living room, watching. Hours passed, and just when I thought maybe he wouldn't come, the motion detector light flickered on. My heart pounded as I looked at the screen. He was there again, standing in the same spot, facing the house. I grabbed my phone and called the police, barely able to keep my voice steady. I told them about the man, about the footage, about how he had been coming back every night. They assured me they would send an officer to patrol the area and asked if I could stay inside with the doors locked. I didn't need to be told twice. I checked on my daughter, making sure she was still asleep before returning to the living room. My hands felt cold as I kept my eyes on the camera feed, watching him. Minutes dragged by, and then suddenly he moved. For the first time in all the footage I had watched, he started walking toward the house. I held my breath, frozen in place as he reached the edge of the porch. The dim light from the street lamp illuminated part of his face, but I couldn't make out any details. He stood there for a moment, then slowly lifted his hand and placed it against the front door. A shiver ran down my spine as I heard the faintest sound of fingertips brushing against the wood. Red and blue lights flashed down the street, and the figure immediately turned and walked away. The police car pulled up just as he disappeared into the darkness. I rushed to the door and opened it as the officer stepped out of his car, his flashlight scanning the yard. He asked me questions, took a look at the footage, and promised they would increase patrols in the area. I barely slept that night, my nerves on edge with every creak and rustle outside. The next morning I sat with my daughter and told her she had been right all along. She looked at me with tired eyes and simply nodded. I promised her I would keep her safe, that I wouldn't ignore her again. The police never found the man. He never returned after that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. Every night I checked the security cameras before locking up, half expecting to see that dark figure standing there again. The fear never fully left, and neither did the guilt of not believing my daughter from the start. Story 7. Someone kept leaving flowers on my front porch every morning. At first I thought it was sweet, maybe a secret admirer or a kind neighbor. They were always fresh, sometimes roses, sometimes lilies, wrapped in simple brown paper. It felt harmless until the morning I found a note tucked under one of the bouquets. "See you soon." The words were scrawled in uneven handwriting, the ink slightly smudged. A chill crept down my spine as I read it, my fingers tightening around the delicate stems. I scanned the quiet street, but there was no sign of anyone watching. My once amused curiosity shifted into unease. That night, I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows. I pulled the curtains shut and left a lamp on in the living room. Sleep came in restless waves, my mind replaying the note over and over. By morning, I almost convinced myself it was a harmless prank, until I opened the door. Another bouquet sat on the porch, perfectly arranged as always. My stomach tightened as I hesitated to pick it up. I bent down slowly, checking underneath for another note, but there was none. Still, my skin prickled with the unsettling awareness that someone had stood here while I slept. I decided to set up my phone to record overnight. I propped it against the window, angling the camera toward the porch. If someone was sneaking around, I would finally have proof. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. When I checked the footage, my hands went cold. The recording showed the front of my house, dimly lit by the porch light. At around 3:12 a.m., a shadowy figure stepped into frame, dressed in dark clothing. They moved slowly, placing the flowers down with deliberate care. The person didn't leave immediately. They stood there, facing my front door, their posture stiff. My breath caught as I watched them reach out, running their fingers along the doorframe. Then, just as suddenly as they arrived, they turned and disappeared into the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. Someone had been inches from my door, touching it like they had a right to be there. I took the footage to the police, hoping they would recognize the person. The officer watched with a serious expression, nodding occasionally. "This could be a case of stalking," he said, glancing at me. "Do you know anyone who might do this?" I shook my head, racking my brain for anyone who had shown unusual interest in me. The officer sighed, handing back my phone. "We'll patrol the area, but keep your doors locked." That night, my nerves were frayed. Every small sound made my heart race. Every shadow outside felt like it was shifting. I resisted the urge to check the porch, afraid of what I might find. Sleep was impossible, and when dawn broke, I already knew what would be waiting. The flowers were there, as expected. My pulse pounded as I bent down to pick them up. A note peeked from beneath the petals, and my breath hitched. This one was different from the last. "Did you like watching me?" My stomach lurched as I dropped the note, my hands trembling. They knew. They had seen the camera, knew I had watched them standing outside my door. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a taunt. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, barely able to keep my voice steady. The officer on the other end listened quietly before saying they would send someone over. I paced my living room, watching the street from behind the curtains, waiting for their arrival. When the officer knocked, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He stepped inside, glancing toward the porch. "No sign of them now," he said, frowning. "But they knew about the camera. That means they're watching you closely." The word sent an icy fear through me. I asked if they could trace where the flowers were coming from. He promised they'd check with local florists, but there was no guarantee. "Until we find them, be cautious," he said. "Stay with someone if you can." I nodded, but I had no one nearby. That night I kept every light on. My heart pounded at every sound outside, but I refused to check the porch. The fear of another note, another sign that they were still watching, was too much. I barely slept, and when morning came, I knew I couldn't stay here alone. I booked a hotel a few miles away, checking in under a different name. The anonymity brought little comfort, but at least I wasn't home. I ignored the nagging thought that the flowers might still be waiting on my porch. The next day, I returned with an officer beside me. My breath caught when I saw the bouquet sitting there like always. But this time there was something else, something that made my blood turn to ice. A single photograph. It was of me, taken from outside my window. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They had been close enough to see me inside, close enough to take this picture without me noticing. My hands shook as I handed it to the officer. His expression darkened as he examined the photo. "Pack a bag," he said firmly. "You're not staying here." I didn't argue. I grabbed my things as quickly as I could, refusing to look at the window where I now knew they had stood. That night, the police staked out my house. I stayed at a friend's place across town, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed with a call from the officer. My heart pounded as I answered. "We got them," he said. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees almost buckled. "We caught them coming back to leave another bouquet." I swallowed hard, gripping the phone. "Who is it?" There was a pause before he answered. "An old coworker," he finally said. "Someone you barely spoke to." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had never noticed them, but they had been watching me for who knows how long. The flowers, the notes, the photo, it had all been leading to something worse. The officer assured me they would be charged, that I was safe now. But even after they were gone, the feeling lingered. I couldn't shake the memory of those quiet mornings, opening the door to find something meant to unnerve me. Even now, I still check my porch, just in case. Story 8. My dog had always been protective, but lately his behavior had changed. Every night he would sit in the hallway, staring at the attic hatch, growling low and steady. At first I brushed it off as him reacting to a sound outside or some old house creaks. But as the nights passed, his growls turned into barking, and he refused to leave his spot under the hatch. I tried to ignore it, telling myself there was nothing up there. But my unease grew when I started hearing faint noises late at night, soft thumps, like someone shifting their weight. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the more I listened, the clearer the sounds became. It wasn't just the house settling, something was moving above me. One night, I finally decided to check. I grabbed a flashlight and a broom, my heart pounding as I reached for the pull cord. The hatch creaked open, dust drifting down as I hesitated, staring into the dark space above. Taking a deep breath, I pulled myself up, the air thick with the smell of dust and something else, something stale. I swept the flashlight across the attic, my breath catching in my throat. Against the far wall, barely visible, was a sleeping bag laid out neatly. Beside it sat an empty water bottle, a half-eaten granola bar, and a small pile of crumpled wrappers. The realization hit me hard. Someone had been living up here. My stomach twisted as I backed toward the opening, scanning for any sign that they were still here. The attic felt eerily silent, but the thought that someone had been so close, just above my ceiling, made my skin crawl. I hurried down the ladder, shoving the hatch shut and locking it, my hands trembling. I called the police, struggling to keep my voice steady as I explained what I had found. They arrived quickly, their presence bringing only slight relief as they pulled the hatch open again. Flashlights flickered through the attic, their voices low as they searched. One of the officers called out, pointing to a spot near the insulation. There, buried in the dust, were footprints, fresh ones. Whoever had been staying up here had been moving around recently. The officers found a small bag hidden in the corner, filled with clothes, a razor, and a few other personal items. They took photos, bagging everything as evidence before turning back to me. Whoever was here wasn't just passing through, one officer said, his face grim. They had been here for a while. The thought made my skin prickle, my mind racing through every night I had slept soundly below, unaware. I asked if they thought the person might return, and the officer hesitated before answering. "It's possible," he admitted, "but they might have known you were getting suspicious and left." That didn't bring me much comfort. They advised me to change my locks, secure my windows, and stay alert. They would patrol the area for the next few nights, but that wasn't enough to shake the lingering dread. I barely slept that night, every small noise making me jolt upright. My dog stayed close, his ears twitching at the slightest creak. The next morning I checked every door and window twice, feeling a deep unease settle in my chest. Someone had been in my home, watching, listening, moving above me while I went about my life unaware. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the paranoia that settled over me. I jumped at every creak, my heart racing when I heard the wind push against the attic hatch. I had the locks changed, installed cameras, and even kept a bat by my bed. But the thought still haunted me. Had they really left? A week later I got my answer. I came home late, my dog greeting me with frantic barking. Something was off, a feeling thick in the air. I stepped inside cautiously, scanning the room before noticing that the attic hatch was slightly ajar. My blood turned cold. I backed toward the door, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. But before I could call, a sound stopped me, a slow, deliberate creak from above. My breath caught, my body frozen in place. Someone was still up there. I bolted outside, dialing the police with shaking fingers. They arrived in minutes, their voices firm as they entered with weapons drawn. I stood on the porch, heart hammering as I watched them pull down the attic ladder and climb up. Moments later, there was a scuffle, a sudden burst of movement. Then silence. One of the officers called out, and another came down, gripping a man by the arm. He was thin, disheveled, his clothes worn and dirty. His eyes flicked toward me, something unreadable in his expression. My stomach lurched. He had been up there all this time. They questioned him outside, asking how long he had been living in my attic. He refused to answer, his gaze shifting away. One of the officers turned to me, explaining that he had likely been entering and leaving while I was at work. My skin crawled at the thought. They took him away, and I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. My home, my safe space, had been invaded in the most unsettling way. Even with him gone, I didn't feel at ease. The idea that someone could live above me without my knowledge was something I would never forget. That night, I barely slept. Every time the house settled, I tensed, expecting another noise from above. My dog stayed by my side, his presence the only thing keeping me grounded. I had the attic hatch nailed shut the next morning, sealing it off completely. But even then, the feeling of being watched never truly left. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. but the fear lingered, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I found myself checking the attic hatch every night, making sure it stayed shut. Even with the man gone, I still felt like I wasn't alone. Story 9. I stepped into my apartment, immediately sensing that something was off. The air felt different, a faint scent of food lingering when I hadn't cooked anything that day. My eyes scanned the kitchen, and my stomach tightened when I noticed that all the cabinets were open. A plate was missing from the drying rack, one I distinctly remembered washing the night before. My heart pounded as I moved cautiously toward the counter, my mind racing with possibilities. I lived alone, and I never left my kitchen in disarray. The sight of the open cabinet sent a chill down my spine, but the missing plate was what truly unsettled me. Someone had been here. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, thinking about calling the police, but I hesitated. I needed to check the rest of the apartment first, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. I moved through the living room, my ears straining for any sound. The front door had been locked when I arrived, and there were no signs of forced entry. The windows were shut, just as I had left them that morning. Everything else seemed normal, but an uneasy feeling settled deep in my gut. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue checking. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I was sure I had closed it before leaving. I hesitated before stepping inside, my pulse hammering in my ears. The bed looked untouched, my blankets neatly folded at the edge just as I had left them. My closet door stood open a few inches, but I dismissed it as paranoia. I backed out of the room, unwilling to linger. Returning to the kitchen, I took a deep breath and pulled up the security footage on my phone. I had installed a camera in my living room months ago, mostly for peace of mind. The feed loaded, showing me leaving for work that morning and nothing unusual for most of the day. Then, around noon, movement flickered across the screen. My breath caught as I rewound and watched more closely. A man crawled out from under my bed, moving slowly and carefully. He stood, stretched his limbs, and walked toward the kitchen as if he belonged there. My stomach twisted in horror as I watched him open cabinets, rummage through my belongings, and eventually take a plate of food. He moved with eerie confidence, showing no signs of urgency or fear. I felt like I was going to be sick. He sat at my table and ate, completely at ease in my home. My fingers tightened around my phone as I watched him clean up after himself, wiping down the counter and carefully placing the plate in the sink. Then, just as smoothly as he had emerged, he walked back toward my bedroom. He lowered himself to the floor and slid under my bed, disappearing from view. My entire body went cold. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone as my mind struggled to process what I had just seen. The footage was only hours old. If he had gone back under my bed, that meant he could still be there. My breathing became shallow as panic gripped me. I needed to get out. Forcing myself to stay calm, I moved toward the door, keeping my steps light. My keys were in my pocket, my fingers gripping them so tightly they dug into my palm. I kept my eyes on my bedroom door, terrified that at any moment it would swing open. My heart felt like it would burst as I reached the door and unlocked it with shaky hands. The moment I was outside, I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the hallway, my mind racing with what to do next. My hands trembled as I called the police, my voice barely steady enough to explain what had happened. They told me to stay put, and that officers would be dispatched immediately. I paced the corridor, my skin crawling at the thought of what might still be lurking in my apartment. Minutes stretched into an eternity before I heard footsteps rushing up the stairs. The police arrived, guns drawn as they entered my home. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement inside. Then a loud crash echoed through the apartment, followed by a shout. My stomach clenched as I realized they had found him. It took 2 officers to drag the man out from under my bed. His clothes were filthy, his face twisted into a blank expression that made my skin crawl. He didn't struggle or speak as they restrained him. One of the officers asked if I recognized him, but I shook my head. I had never seen this man before in my life. They found a small bag hidden under my bed, filled with food wrappers, water bottles, and even some of my clothes. The realization made my stomach churn. He had been living in my home for who knows how long. The officers questioned me about any missing items, but nothing major had been stolen. The man had simply been hiding, waiting for me to leave each day. As they took him away, one of the officers told me I had been lucky. If I hadn't checked the footage when I did, I might have gone to bed that night with him still lying beneath me. The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I had ignored the signs, things could have ended much worse. That night I stayed in a hotel, unable to set foot back in my apartment. Sleep didn't come easily, my mind replaying the image of him crawling out from under my bed. I kept imagining what could have happened if I had stayed home sick one day, if I had taken a nap in the afternoon. The sheer violation of my space left me shaken. The next day, I packed up my things and broke my lease. I couldn't live there anymore, not with the knowledge of what had happened. The landlord was sympathetic, though shocked, and assured me the locks would be changed immediately. It didn't matter. I knew I would never feel safe in that apartment again. Even now, the memory lingers in the back of my mind. I still check under my bed and know, no matter where I am. The fear never fully left me. Sometimes I wonder how many other people have experienced something similar and never even realized it. The thought alone is enough to keep me awake at night. Story 10. I was in the middle of my evening routine when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound echoed through the quiet house. It was a man standing outside, his figure faintly outlined by the porch light. He looked tired, disheveled even, as if he had been on the road for hours. His clothes were dusty, and his hands were covered in grime. But the most unsettling thing was his eyes. They were wide and almost desperate as he asked if I could help him with his car. I hesitated for a moment, trying to size him up through the small window in the door. He didn't look dangerous at first glance, but there was something about the way he was standing unnaturally still that made my skin prickle. I didn't want to take any chances. I had heard stories about strangers asking for help and then turning out to be thieves or worse. So I quickly replied, "Sorry, I can't help," and shut the door firmly. It felt like the right thing to do. A few minutes later, I was still standing in the living room, the image of his face lingering in my mind. The encounter had left me uneasy, so I decided to check the peephole, just to make sure he was gone. I moved quietly, hoping to catch a glimpse of his retreating figure. As I looked through the small circle of glass, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing right in front of the door, staring directly at me through the peephole. He wasn't moving, not a muscle twitched, and his gaze never wavered. His eyes were locked onto mine, unblinking, like he knew I was watching him. It felt as though time had stopped, the silence pressing in around me. I quickly backed away from the door, my breath shallow as panic started to rise in my chest. What was he doing there? Why hadn't he left? I forced myself to take a few deep breaths, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just waiting for someone to open the door, but something about the whole situation felt off. I wondered if I should call the police, but I didn't want to overreact. He hadn't done anything yet, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that he was waiting for something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I realized I hadn't heard any footsteps, no indication that he had moved away from the door. I crept back to the peephole, cautiously this time, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. There was a part of me that hoped he would be gone, but as I peered through the lens, I saw him again, still standing there, motionless, staring at the door. His face was now just inches away from the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he had been waiting for me to check. The unsettling intensity of his gaze sent a chill down my spine. I stepped back, my mind racing. What was his game? Why wasn't he leaving? Was he trying to intimidate me, or was there something more sinister at play? I considered my options, but none of them felt right. I didn't want to open the door again, but I also didn't want to stay in here alone with him just outside. My fingers hovered over my phone, wondering if I should call for help. But something told me that if I did, it would only escalate things further. The minutes stretched on like hours. I couldn't tear myself away from the door, even though every instinct told me to run, to lock myself in the back room and hide. But I couldn't stop staring at the peephole, waiting for him to make a move. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a sound, a faint creak of wood. He was still there, but now something had changed. His expression was no longer desperate or pleading. It had shifted into something darker, something unreadable. Suddenly, there was a knock again, louder this time, followed by a strange tapping on the doorframe. I jumped, my heart skipping a beat. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, each tap sending a jolt of fear through my body. I had to do something. My mind raced through all the possible scenarios, but nothing seemed to fit. This wasn't just a simple case of someone needing help. This felt like something else entirely. I bolted from the front door, moving as silently as possible, and grabbed the nearest object I could find, an old baseball bat I kept for protection. My palms were sweaty as I clutched the handle, feeling the weight of it in my hands. I couldn't think straight anymore, not with him out there, just beyond the door. The knocking had stopped, replaced by silence, but it was the kind of silence that only made things worse. The longer I waited, the more the dread settled in. I crept back to the peephole, my breath coming in short gasps, and looked through again. But this time he wasn't standing there. He was gone. My heart skipped a beat as I felt an odd mixture of relief and confusion. Where had he gone? Had he finally given up? Or was he waiting for me to make the next move, to do something foolish? I didn't wait around to find out. I called the police, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened. They promised to send someone out, but when they arrived a short while later, there was no sign of the man. He was nowhere to be found. The officers looked around, but there was no trace of him, not even a footprint on the ground. They left, assuring me that I was safe, but I knew better. I had locked every door and window, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of his unblinking eyes stayed with me, haunting me in the dark corners of my mind. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there somewhere watching. Story 11. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror, shining bright and unrelenting. At first, I thought it was just another car on the road, but as the miles passed, I realized it hadn't changed lanes or turned off. The same set of lights followed me, always a few car lengths behind, unwavering. A chill ran down my spine as I shifted in my seat, trying to keep my eyes on the road while also keeping an eye on the rear view. I took a sharp left turn onto a side street, hoping to lose them in the maze of residential roads. My heart pounded as I drove faster, glancing back occasionally to see the headlights still there, always following, never stopping. The road twisted and turned, but no matter where I went, the car stayed right behind me. I could feel my hands gripping the wheel tighter, the anxiety building with every mile. I tried a few more quick turns, desperate to shake the car off, but it remained persistent. It was almost as if the driver knew exactly what I was doing, mirroring my every move. My nerves were shot, and my mind raced through possibilities. Was it someone just going in the same direction, or was there something more sinister behind their constant presence? I couldn't seem to make up my mind, and the uncertainty made everything worse. After several more turns and a few straightaways, I saw the familiar sight of my street ahead. Relief surged through me for a split second, but it was quickly replaced by dread. I pulled into my driveway, eyes darting between the car in front of me and the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, close enough that I could almost feel the heat of the lights through the glass. I put the car in park, hoping that would be the end of it, but my heart sank when I saw the headlights flash off. I sat frozen in my car, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The other car had pulled to a stop at the end of my driveway and turned off its lights. They didn't drive past. They didn't pull into another driveway. They just parked there, in the dark, on the street. I sat for a few moments, my mind racing with 100 different scenarios. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe it was nothing, just a random coincidence. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I needed to get out of my car, but the thought of walking past that dark streetlight, knowing someone was sitting there watching me, filled me with dread. I finally gathered the courage to open my door, the sound of the metal scraping against the frame almost deafening in the quiet night. I stepped out slowly, keeping my eyes on the car across the street. It sat there motionless, like some kind of shadow waiting to spring to life. I moved as quickly as I could, crossing my yard, but the sense of being watched never left. I glanced back over my shoulder just in time to see the car's headlights flash back on, bright and blinding. I froze in place, my heart skipping a beat. The car didn't move, though. It just sat there, its lights now shining directly at me, illuminating the front of my house. I tried to steady my breath, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just waiting for someone. Maybe they had gotten lost, but the more I thought about it, the more the fear gnawed at me. I rushed to my front door, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked it. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd been so scared. Once inside, I slammed the door behind me, locking it as quickly as I could. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains just enough to see outside. The car was still there, sitting in the dark. The headlights had turned off again, but now, the only thing I could see were the faint outlines of the car's silhouette. My stomach churned with a growing sense of unease. Whoever was in that car was watching me. I could feel it, the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? A car had followed me home. What if it was just someone who got lost, or someone else who lived in the neighborhood? My mind ran in circles, each thought more irrational than the last, but the feeling of being hunted was undeniable. I decided to wait, watching from my window. Time passed slowly, the minutes stretching on endlessly. The car didn't move. It just sat there, parked, unmoving, its engine barely a whisper in the night. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it, even though my body screamed for me to get away from the window. After what felt like hours, the car's lights flicked on again, bright enough to make me squint. For a split second, I thought they were finally leaving, but instead the car slowly backed up, turning around in the middle of the street. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, as the car began to drive away. I waited until it was out of sight, the darkness swallowing it whole. I stood there for a while, still trying to process what had just happened. My pulse was still racing, and the fear hadn't fully faded. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to do something. Even as the night returned to its eerie stillness, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I made sure every lock was in place and every light was on before crawling into bed. But sleep didn't come easily that night, and I lay there wide awake, listening for any sound that might signal the return of the car, or worse, its driver. Story 12. I stopped at a gas station off a deserted highway, my car sputtering from the long drive. The station was the only building in sight for miles, surrounded by nothing but endless stretches of barren land. The air was thick with heat, and I could feel the tension in the silence of the place. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed that the station seemed oddly quiet for such a desolate location. The cashier behind the counter didn't greet me, his eyes flicking nervously between the counter and the window as I walked in. I approached the counter to pay for gas, but the man seemed unsettled, almost as if he were trying to avoid looking at me directly. His hand trembled as he took the money, and when I asked him about the road ahead, he barely muttered a response. As I turned to leave, the cashier leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Leave now," he said, his eyes wide with fear. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. His urgency felt strange, almost unnatural, but the unsettling atmosphere of the station had already put me on edge. I nodded hesitantly, thinking it was just the nerves of a lonely man working a dead-end job in the middle of nowhere. I walked out into the oppressive heat, the door creaking behind me as I stepped onto the cracked pavement. My car was parked a few feet away, the engine still warm from the drive. I reached for my keys, but before I could unlock the door, I noticed something strange. 3 men were standing by my car, their backs to the station. They hadn't been there when I walked in. My heart raced as I instinctively took a step back, glancing over my shoulder to see if there were any other cars around. But the highway was as empty as it had been when I pulled in. The men were dressed in mismatched clothing, some of it too clean for the desolation around us. They stood with their arms crossed, watching me with unsettling stillness. I tried to maintain composure, hoping they were just some travelers who had stopped for a break, but the way they stared made my stomach churn. One of the men, the tallest, slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes narrowing as if sizing me up. His lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, sending a cold shiver through me. I swallowed hard, my hand gripping the door handle tighter. I was about to speak, to ask if they needed something, but my voice caught in my throat. Something about their presence felt wrong, like they didn't belong here, like they were out of place in a way I couldn't explain. My gaze flicked back to the cashier inside, but he was no longer in sight, the store now completely still. One of the men, shorter and stockier than the others, took a step forward, breaking the silence. "You shouldn't have stopped here," he said in a low voice, his tone strangely calm. I took a cautious step back, my heart pounding in my chest. His words felt like a warning, but they were laced with something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the signal was dead. I cursed under my breath, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way out of this. The men hadn't moved, but they hadn't taken their eyes off me either. The tension in the air felt thick, like something was about to snap. I needed to get away. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm, considering my options. I could try to get in my car and drive off, but the thought of those men following me made my skin crawl. They were blocking the way, and if I made a move, I wasn't sure what they would do. It was as if the world had gone silent around us, every distant sound swallowed by the stillness. Another step forward. The tall man spoke again, his voice like gravel. "You should have listened to him," he said, nodding toward the station. My mind raced as I realized he was referring to the cashier's warning. It was clear now that something was terribly wrong here, but what? My thoughts scrambled, but I knew I had to act fast. I decided to make a run for it. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out of there before things escalated. I turned on my heel and bolted toward my car, the sound of my footsteps pounding in my ears. But just as my fingers brushed the door handle, a hand shot out from behind me, grabbing my shoulder and spinning me around. I found myself face to face with the tallest man, his cold smile now replaced with a look of disdain. "You really should have left when you had the chance," he muttered. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I could feel the weight of his stare, the heaviness of the moment, and the gnawing sense that I had stepped into something far worse than I had ever imagined. In a burst of adrenaline, I yanked my arm free and shoved him away. He stumbled back slightly, but the men didn't move to stop me. I wasted no time. I scrambled into my car, slamming the door shut and starting the engine in one frantic motion. My hands were shaking as I threw the car into gear and peeled out of the lot, my tires screeching against the asphalt. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The three men were standing by my car, watching me drive off. They didn't chase me. They didn't even move. But their eyes, those cold, unblinking eyes, stayed with me as I left the gas station behind. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. By then, my heart had finally stopped racing, but the memory of that encounter lingered. I never went back to that gas station, and I made sure never to travel the deserted highway again. There are places you pass through, and places that pass through you, and that station was one of them. Story 13. The sun was setting as I drove along the long stretch of road, the landscape turning to nothing but miles of flat, empty terrain. I had been driving for hours, and the exhaustion was starting to catch up with me. I decided it was time to pull over and take a short break. I found a quiet spot off the road, a small, secluded area that seemed perfect for a few minutes of rest. As I settled into the driver's seat, I left the engine running to keep the air conditioning going, and I relaxed, letting the silence of the open road surround me. The peacefulness of the moment was a welcome relief from the endless stretches of asphalt. But my peace didn't last long. I noticed headlights from a car in my rearview mirror, pulling up behind me and parking a few spaces away. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a lonely road, and other drivers probably needed to rest as much as I did. But something about the way the car just sat there, engine off, made me uneasy. It was almost as if they were waiting for something or someone. I shook the feeling off, deciding I was just overthinking. After all, it wasn't uncommon for people to take a break along these remote roads. Minutes passed, and I glanced back at the car. I saw the figure inside shift slightly, but I couldn't make out any details. The windows were tinted, and the car sat in perfect stillness, its engine quiet. A strange sense of unease crawled up my spine. It was late, and the darkened sky above me made the whole scene feel more ominous. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were just another traveler, tired and waiting to hit the road again. Then, I heard it. A soft tapping sound on the window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, sharper this time. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locked onto the rearview mirror. The silhouette of a figure stood just outside my window, blocking out the dim light of the street lamp behind them. In their hand, they held something metallic that glinted in the light. My stomach sank as I realized it was a knife. My heart raced. I couldn't move. I felt like I was trapped in a dream, frozen and powerless. The figure continued to tap on the window, the sound sharp and deliberate. It wasn't a random knock, it was calculated, as if they were waiting for me to react. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and I could see the glint of the knife's blade as it scraped lightly against the glass. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through every possible scenario, but none of them made sense. Who would just approach someone's car like this, especially in the middle of nowhere? Panic started to rise, making it hard to think clearly. Should I stay still? Should I drive away? I was too afraid to make a move. With shaking hands, I slowly reached for my phone. My fingers fumbled, slipping across the screen as I dialed 911. I wasn't sure if I'd even get a signal, but I had to try. I could feel the presence of the person outside, their shadow looming larger as they pressed the knife against the window, tapping harder now. I held my breath, praying that help would come soon, but my connection was weak, and the call didn't go through. The tapping stopped, and a sickening silence filled the air. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears, I could barely hear anything else. The figure outside stood perfectly still, and for a moment, I thought they might be waiting for me to make a move. My eyes darted around, searching for anything that might help me. There was nothing, just the vast emptiness of the highway and the looming darkness. I knew I had to act fast. My mind told me to stay calm, to think this through, but all I could think about was the knife in her hand. I wasn't sure how much time I had, but I wasn't going to sit here and wait to find out. I shifted my foot to the brake and pressed it down, slowly rolling the car forward, inching away from the figure. But the movement caught their attention. The figure lunged forward, pressing the blade against the window. The tap turned into a sharp, aggressive motion, and I felt my stomach twist in fear. They were now blocking my way, their breath fogging up the glass. My pulse raced as I slammed the car into drive and gunned the engine, pulling forward faster than I'd ever moved before. The figure took a step back, but not fast enough. I didn't look back. I didn't care to see if they were following. My only focus was on the road ahead. I drove for miles, my eyes fixed on the dim headlights in front of me, and I didn't stop until I saw a small gas station in the distance, the lights flickering in the otherwise dark landscape. I pulled into the station, my hands still shaking as I killed the engine. I sat there for a few moments, trying to catch my breath, my heart still racing in my chest. I looked around the lot, half expecting to see the car from behind earlier pull in after me. But there was nothing, just the quiet, empty station. I walked inside, my body still tense, my thoughts a mess. The clerk at the counter gave me a strange look but didn't ask any questions as I grabbed a bottle of water. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, the fear from those moments pressing in from all sides. When I finally stepped back outside, I took a deep breath, glancing at the parking lot. My car was the only one there, and I didn't see anything unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe, that someone was out there, waiting for the right moment. The tap of the knife on the window echoed in my mind, and in the back of my mind, I knew I would never stop looking over my shoulder when driving alone at night. Story 14. While hiking alone, I came across a small, isolated cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't on the trail, and I didn't recall seeing it on any maps. The forest around it seemed unnaturally quiet, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. My curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped off the path to investigate. The cabin was old, its wood darkened by years of exposure to the elements. The windows were cloudy with grime, and the roof was missing a few shingles. It looked abandoned, like it had been forgotten by time. But as I got closer, something made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stood in front of one of the windows and peered through the glass, trying to make out any details inside. The cabin was dim, but I could see movement. A figure was sitting in a chair by the fireplace. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But then the figure slowly turned toward the window. It was a man. He was grinning at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. His smile didn't reach his eyes, it was unsettling, almost predatory. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. How could he be inside if the cabin was abandoned? I stepped back, my heart racing. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the man in the window. He didn't move, just kept staring at me, his grin widening as if he were savoring my fear. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if his smile was growing more sinister by the second. A cold chill ran through me, and I quickly turned away, my legs already moving toward the trail. But then I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The sound of footsteps crunching on the dry leaves behind me. I spun around, but the cabin was still in the same position, the figure still sitting by the window. I couldn't hear any voices or movement inside, but I knew I wasn't alone. My pulse quickened, and I began walking faster, my eyes darting around as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The man hadn't followed me, at least not yet, but the fear still gripped me tightly. My feet stumbled on the uneven trail as I tried to put more distance between myself and the cabin. I had to get back to the main path. I had to get out of the woods. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting the man to be right behind me, his twisted grin still plastered on his face. The path seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees pressing in from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the woods were closing in around me. I glanced back one more time. The cabin was still visible through the trees, but now there was no sign of the man. Relief washed over me for a moment, but I couldn't shake the unease that still lingered. Had I just imagined it all? Had the figure in the window been a trick of the light? It didn't make sense. The cabin had looked abandoned, yet there he was, watching me. And why hadn't I heard him move or seen him leave the cabin? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. I needed to focus. The path ahead was narrow, the trees thick and dark. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the main trail, but the sound of footsteps was still there. The footsteps weren't mine, they were behind me, a faint, rhythmic crunching of leaves and twigs. I spun around again, heart hammering in my chest. No one was there. I was alone. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure moving in the shadows between the trees. It was the man. His grin was still there, that same wide, unsettling smile. He was moving quickly now, darting from tree to tree as though he were stalking me. Panic surged through me as I broke into a run, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trail ahead blurred as I sprinted, the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. I could hear the man's breathing, now heavy, labored, as though he was just behind me. Every instinct screamed at me to run faster, but the trees were dense, and the path twisted in ways I hadn't remembered. I glanced over my shoulder, terrified to see the man gaining on me. His grin was still fixed in place, his eyes locked onto mine as though he were savoring my terror. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but I pushed myself up and kept running. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst onto the main trail. I didn't look back as I ran down the path, my legs burning from the effort. The sound of footsteps stopped, but the dread never left. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot at the edge of the woods. Breathing heavily, I looked around to make sure I was truly alone. The parking lot was empty, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon. I couldn't shake the image of the man's twisted grin. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? A man in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. I kept it to myself, but the fear never truly left. Every time I went hiking, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that same figure lurking just beyond the trees. The woods never felt quite the same after that. The quiet that had once been comforting now felt oppressive. The sense of being watched lingered, even when I was miles away from that cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, waiting. Story 15. I was walking back to my motel after a long day of driving through desolate backroads. The wind had a chill to it, and the fading light cast long shadows on the empty street. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and the area around the motel felt eerily quiet, almost as if it were stuck in time. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and I found myself looking over my shoulder more than I should have. As I neared the entrance to the motel, a car suddenly appeared beside me. The headlights were bright and glaring, but the vehicle was moving slowly, almost as if it was waiting for me to notice it. The car's engine hummed quietly, and it took me a moment to process the situation. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when the window rolled down, revealing the driver's face, a man in his late 40s, with a scruffy beard and dark, tired eyes. "Get in," he said, his voice low and calm. "I know where you're staying." I froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. My instinct screamed at me to keep walking, to ignore him and keep my distance. But something about the way he said it, like he already knew far more than he should, made the hairs on my arms prickle. I had never seen this man before, and yet he knew exactly where I was staying, down to the name of the motel. I wasn't sure whether to be curious or terrified. I took a step back, shaking my head slowly. "No, thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine." The man didn't seem to take my refusal as a deterrent. Instead, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm just trying to help," he continued, his voice still calm but carrying an unsettling edge. "You're not safe walking around here alone." A chill ran through me at his words, and I instinctively looked around. The street was still empty, with no other cars in sight, but the air felt thick with tension. My pulse quickened as I wondered if this man was just a stranger trying to offer a ride, or if there was something more sinister at play. "I'm fine," I repeated, my voice firmer now. "I don't need a ride." I turned away, hoping he'd get the message, but the car didn't move. The driver's gaze remained fixed on me, and I felt the weight of his stare digging into my back. Without warning, the car moved forward, stopping directly in front of me, blocking my path. My heart skipped a beat, and I took another step back, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone in my pocket. The man didn't get out of the car, but his eyes never left me. "I'm not trying to scare you," he said, his voice almost too calm, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "But you're making a mistake. You don't know this place like I do. People here aren't friendly." The words hung in the air, making me uneasy. I glanced at the motel behind me, wondering if there was anyone inside, anyone who might hear me if I needed help. The silence stretched on for a moment too long, and I felt an instinctual pull to move quickly. But before I could take a step, the man spoke again. "You really shouldn't be out here alone at night," he said. "You don't know what's out there. Trust me, I've seen things." My grip on my phone tightened as I looked around again, feeling the isolation of the moment. There was no one else in sight, and the shadows of the motel loomed in the distance, offering little comfort. Something about the man's words struck me as more than just cautionary. There was an edge to them that made me question his true intentions. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to sound confident, even though my mind was racing. "I'm fine. You can go now." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing his next words carefully. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Fine, have it your way," he said. His voice softened, but there was an undeniable edge of warning in his tone. "But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, the car moved away slowly, its engine humming quietly as it turned onto the next street, disappearing into the darkness. I watched it until it was out of sight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My legs felt weak, and I leaned against the nearest lamppost for support, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. The odd exchange left me unsettled, but I forced myself to focus. I had to get inside the motel, lock the door, and make sure everything was secure. I turned back to the motel entrance, my eyes scanning the surroundings one more time. There was no sign of the car or the man, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I entered the motel lobby and quickly checked in, keeping my voice steady as I spoke to the clerk. My mind kept drifting back to the man in the car and the unsettling way he had spoken to me. Who was he? What had he meant by his warnings? The words echoed in my mind, "You don't know this place like I do. People here aren't friendly." After receiving my key, I headed to my room, still feeling on edge. I made sure to lock the door behind me and pulled the curtains shut. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, my thoughts racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the man's warnings were more than just words. I lay in bed, the silence pressing in on me, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the car, the man's face, and the strange tension in his voice. I wondered if I had made a mistake by refusing his offer. Could he have been trying to help, or was there something more sinister going on? As the night dragged on, I couldn't help but feel that the man was still out there, watching. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind, but the feeling of unease lingered. I had made it to my room, but I wasn't sure if I was truly safe. The quiet of the motel, the darkness of the night, it all seemed to close in on me, making it hard to breathe. Story 16. I had been driving for hours trying to get to my destination before nightfall when I decided to take a shortcut through a rural area to save some time. The road was narrow, winding through thick trees with only the occasional farmhouse dotting the landscape. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the quiet of the countryside settled around me, and I felt an unsettling sense of isolation. It was one of those moments where everything seemed too still, like something was waiting just out of sight. As I rounded a bend, I saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, waving her arms in distress. Her clothes were tattered, and she looked like she had been through something. I slowed down, unsure of what I was seeing. The area was so remote, and it didn't seem like anyone else was around. My first instinct was to pull over and help her, but something about the scene made me hesitate. The woman's frantic gestures and wide eyes felt off, like she was trying to communicate more than just a simple emergency. I pushed aside my growing unease and stopped the car, rolling down the window just enough to speak to her. "Are you okay?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. The woman looked at me with desperation, her face pale and gaunt. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "They're after me. I don't know what to do." I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation. That's when I noticed them two men crouching low in the ditch nearby. At first I thought it might be some kind of strange coincidence, but their body language gave them away. They were too still, too deliberate in their hiding. One of them was peering out from behind a clump of grass, while the other was slightly further down the ditch, watching me closely. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the woman wasn't the only one in distress here. The men weren't trying to hide their presence from her, they were waiting for her to make a move. The woman caught my glance and her eyes widened, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the men. "Please, please don't leave me," she screamed, her voice breaking with fear. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. I looked back at the men, who were now standing up slightly, their postures stiff and uninviting. They didn't look like they were just passing by. They looked like they had been waiting for something or someone. I reached for my phone, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. "There's a woman on the side of the road, and I think she's in trouble. There are two men hiding in the ditch near her. I'm not sure what's going on, but I need help." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way and instructed me to stay in my car, which I reluctantly did. I kept my eyes on the two men who had now started to move toward the road, their steps slow and calculated. I tried to keep the woman in view, but she was beginning to move toward the woods on the other side of the road. Her frantic behavior suggested she was more afraid of the men than she was of me. I couldn't just sit there and watch, but the thought of getting involved was terrifying. What if I made things worse? What if the men had a weapon or were part of something much bigger? I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see other cars approaching, but the road remained empty. The men were closing in on her now, their pace picking up as they moved toward her with purpose. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized I was the only one who could do anything. I couldn't just drive away. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, keeping my eyes fixed on the woman and the men. "Hey," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. "Stay back. I've called the police." The woman stopped in her tracks, her head snapping toward me. For a brief moment, her face softened with relief, but then her expression changed. She looked at the men, who were now moving toward her with increasing speed. One of the men shouted something to her, but I couldn't make out the words. She turned and bolted into the woods, disappearing into the trees before I could say anything else. The two men followed her without hesitation, sprinting into the woods after her. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The dispatcher had told me to stay in my car, but I couldn't just let them go after her. I grabbed my phone again, ready to call 911 once more, but I knew the police wouldn't arrive in time. My heart raced as I debated whether to chase after them or stay put and wait for help. Then I heard a rustling in the trees behind me, followed by a low, gravelly voice calling out, "You shouldn't have gotten involved, friend." I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. A third man had emerged from the shadows, standing just off the road, his eyes locked onto mine. His posture was menacing, and I realized I was surrounded. My pulse quickened as I took a step back, trying to think of my next move. I didn't wait to find out what he was going to do. I jumped back into my car and slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I started the engine and peeled out of there, my tires screeching on the gravel road. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped away, catching a glimpse of the third man standing still, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, my heart still racing. I pulled into a gas station and immediately called the police again, telling them everything. They promised they'd investigate, but I knew I had already made my decision. I wasn't going back. I just hoped the woman had escaped, and that the men wouldn't come after me. I'd never trust a shortcut again. Story 17. At the rest stop, I noticed him almost immediately. He was standing near a group of parked trucks, leaning against his car, his eyes fixed on me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just a traveler like me, stretching his legs before hitting the road again. I refueled my car and grabbed a quick snack, glancing back at him once more. He hadn't moved from his spot, still watching me. I debated leaving the rest stop, but something kept me there, a feeling I couldn't shake. Finally, I climbed back into my car and started the engine, determined to continue my journey. As I merged back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw his car. The same car that had been parked across the lot, now following me. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence, that he was probably heading in the same direction. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The minutes stretched into an hour as I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. His car stayed a constant distance behind me, never speeding up or slowing down. I tried to shake off the growing sense of dread, but it only intensified. Each time I glanced at the mirror, his headlights seemed a little closer, his presence a little more suffocating. I took an exit, hoping to lose him in the winding back roads. But when I checked again, his headlights were still there, tracking my every move. Panic began to set in. I turned onto another side street, making sharp turns, trying to lose him. But each time I looked behind me, his car was there, unwavering. My breath quickened as I considered my options. I could try to call the police, but what would I say? That a man was following me on the highway. Would they take me seriously? I thought about pulling over to the side of the road, pretending I needed help, but that felt like playing into his game. I kept driving, hoping that I was overreacting, that I was just imagining things. But the longer he followed me, the more I realized this wasn't a coincidence. His car never swerved, never strayed. He was deliberately staying behind me, matching my pace. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see his face. The sky was darkening, and I knew I had to make a decision. I glanced at the signs for a nearby town and decided to take the next exit. I needed to get to a more populated area, somewhere with more people. Maybe I could find a gas station or a diner, someplace safe where I could make a phone call, or at least get help if things escalated. I turned off the highway and onto the smaller roads that led into town. The headlights behind me followed without hesitation. As I approached the town center, I saw a couple of cars ahead of me, people going about their evening routines. It should have been reassuring, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being hunted. I spotted a well-lit gas station on the corner, and without thinking, I turned into the lot. My tires screeched as I parked near the pumps, and I quickly threw the car in park, ready to make a run for the store. As I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, his car slowed down and pulled into the lot right behind me. My stomach churned as I realized there was nowhere to run. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the number for the police. As it rang, I watched the man get out of his car, his movements deliberate and slow. My breath caught in my throat as I wondered if he had been expecting this, if he knew I would pull into the gas station. When the officer answered, I rushed to explain what had been happening, my voice frantic. I barely made sense as I tried to describe the man, the car, the way he had followed me for miles. The officer assured me that someone would be there soon, but as I glanced at the man approaching my car, I didn't feel comforted. He was getting closer. I locked the doors as he reached my car, his face still hidden in the shadows. I couldn't make out his features, but I could feel his eyes on me through the glass. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me with an unnerving stillness. My pulse pounded in my ears as I kept my hands on the steering wheel, ready to drive away if I had to. The officer's voice broke through the panic in my mind. "We're sending someone to your location," they said, their calm tone at odds with the fear flooding my chest. But before I could respond, the man turned around and walked back to his car. He didn't hurry, didn't look back at me. He simply got in and drove away, leaving me alone in the gas station lot. I sat there for a few minutes, frozen, my mind racing. The man's car disappeared into the night, and the adrenaline slowly started to fade, leaving me shaking. The officer called again to check if I was okay. I told him what had happened, still trying to make sense of it all. When the police arrived, they checked the security footage from the gas station cameras. They confirmed that the man had been following me, but there was no way to identify him from the footage. It seemed like I had just narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter with someone who had no intention of letting me go. As I left the gas station and continued my journey, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face in the rearview mirror. I wondered if he would ever follow me again, or if I had somehow become his obsession. The highway felt emptier now, the dark stretch of road ahead more ominous than ever. And as I drove into the night, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, knowing that somewhere, just out of sight, he could be watching me. Story 18. I had been driving all night, the road stretching endlessly before me. I needed a place to rest, and when I saw the neon lights of a cheap motel flickering in the distance, I didn't hesitate. The sign read vacancy, and I was too exhausted to be picky. I pulled into the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my tires, and parked in front of the office. The manager greeted me with a friendly smile as I entered, his voice soft but welcoming. I was too tired to engage in conversation, so I paid for the night and headed to my room. The hallway was dimly lit, and the smell of cleaning chemicals lingered in the air. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately felt the weight of exhaustion on my shoulders. The room was small but functional. The bed was covered in faded, floral-patterned sheets, and the walls were a dull beige, marked by years of wear. I didn't mind, though. I just wanted to sleep. I double-checked the door to make sure it was locked, then collapsed onto the bed, the worn mattress creaking beneath me. I slept fitfully, waking several times during the night from strange sounds. The wind outside rattled the windows, and every now and then I could hear faint footsteps in the hallway. But each time, I told myself it was nothing. I wasn't in the mood to investigate. The morning came all too quickly, the sunlight filtering through the thin curtains. I groggily got out of bed, stretched, and went to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror above the sink was cracked, but I didn't care. I was ready to get back on the road. I gathered my things and left the room, locking the door behind me as I walked to the office. The manager was standing behind the counter when I entered, his smile wide and pleasant. "Good morning. Did you enjoy your stay?" he asked, his tone warm and casual. I nodded, too tired to be overly enthusiastic. "Yes, it was fine. Thank you," I replied, giving him a small smile in return. He chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling. "Good, because you never locked your door." My stomach dropped. The words echoed in my mind, and for a moment I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. I froze, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned slightly over the counter, his smile never fading. "When you checked in last night, you gave me your ID, and I noticed you never locked your door when you went inside." His gaze lingered on me, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "I thought I'd mention it this morning, in case you didn't realize." I swallowed, my throat dry. I had been certain I had locked the door. I always locked the door. Had I really forgotten? The thought made me uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I hadn't checked properly. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, forcing a smile. I didn't want to stick around any longer than I had to. I grabbed my keys and turned to leave, but something stopped me. "Was everything okay last night?" the manager asked, his voice suddenly too calm, too knowing. "No problems?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, everything was fine," I said quickly, not wanting to linger on the subject. I headed toward the door, my nerves frayed. But as I reached the threshold, the manager spoke again. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice low and almost too friendly. "Because I've been watching you. I saw you come in last night. I saw you leave this morning." I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The manager's smile remained fixed, but there was something different in his eyes now, something unsettling. "You were alone, weren't you?" he said, leaning in just slightly. "No one else came with you? No one was in your room?" My breath caught in my throat. I had locked the door, hadn't I? I had checked it before I went to bed. But what if I hadn't? What if someone had been there while I was sleeping? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more horrifying than the last. I backed away slowly, my legs unsteady. "I'm going to go now," I said, my voice shaky. I didn't wait for him to respond. I opened the door and stepped outside, feeling the cool morning air hit my face like a slap. My car was parked just a few feet away, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was being watched. I got into my car and locked the doors, my hands trembling as I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the manager standing in the doorway, watching me. But there was nothing, just the empty parking lot stretching behind me. I told myself it was fine, that I had overreacted. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The manager's words echoed in my mind, his calm, knowing tone sending shivers down my spine. Had he been watching me the entire time? Had someone else been in my room? The thought gnawed at me, and I couldn't push it out of my mind. I had stayed at that motel for one night, and yet it felt like I had just narrowly escaped something far more sinister, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Story 19. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon as I drove through the desert, the vast emptiness stretching out in every direction. I had been on the road for hours, the monotony of the landscape starting to make my eyelids heavy. The silence of the desert was almost suffocating, but I welcomed the peace. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of the air conditioning. After another yawn, I decided it was time for a break. There was nothing around for miles, but the flat stretch of road seemed like the perfect place to pull over and catch a quick nap. I parked my car on the side of the highway, ensuring my doors were locked before I reclined the seat back and closed my eyes. The sun's warmth still lingered on the hood of the car, but the coolness of the evening began to settle in. I didn't know how long I had been asleep, but I woke suddenly disoriented. My head was still heavy with sleep. and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the dimming light outside. As I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the fog in my mind, I heard the unmistakable sound of my car door handle being jiggled. The metallic sound was faint at first, but grew more persistent. My heart began to race as I tried to process what was happening. I sat up slowly, trying to make sense of the situation. The sound of the door handle being tugged, it repeated itself, each time with more urgency. I could see the dim outline of someone through the side window, their shadow moving with the movement of the handle. My first thought was that it might be someone needing help, but then I noticed something strange. There was no knock, no voice calling out. The person wasn't trying to speak to me, just trying the handle over and over again. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my fingers cold with fear. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned my head to get a better look through the rearview mirror. My mind raced, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a hitchhiker, or someone who had lost their way and needed help. But none of that made sense in this desolate part of the desert, miles from the nearest town. I shifted in my seat, trying to turn my body without making any noise. As I looked out the window, I froze. There, just inches from the glass, was a person standing by my car door. Their face was expressionless, almost unnaturally so. The only movement they made was the continued tugging at the handle, as if they hadn't even noticed I was inside the car. My stomach churned, and a wave of panic washed over me. The person's face was pale, their eyes wide open but lifeless. I couldn't make out any features, just the hollow emptiness of their stare. There was no emotion in their gaze, no recognition or sign of fear, just a blankness that sent chills down my spine. My breath caught in my chest as I tried to remain still, hoping they wouldn't notice I was awake. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. The minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity. The person didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring through the window. I felt trapped, suffocated by the heat of the car and the oppressive stillness of the desert around me. I kept hoping they would just leave, that this was some strange encounter that would end as quickly as it started. But no matter how long I waited, they remained there, unmoving, their stare fixed on me. I took a deep breath and reached for the door lock, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't make myself move. The idea of opening the door and facing them filled me with dread. What did they want? Why hadn't they said anything? I felt like I was suffocating in the silence, my mind spiraling with questions I couldn't answer. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound, the faint scrape of the car's side mirror as the person shifted slightly. I jolted, panic seizing me. They were so close now that I could see their breath fogging up the glass, a sickly, almost ghostly mist that seemed to hang in the air. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight and the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but watch them. Finally, after what felt like hours, the person moved. They didn't retreat, didn't leave, they simply took a step back, and with the same strange, lifeless expression, they turned and began to walk away. My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't dare move until they were a safe distance from the car. I waited, my eyes glued to their back as they disappeared into the growing darkness of the desert. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, still processing what had just happened. The only sounds were the soft breeze rustling the dry desert plants and the distant hum of the highway. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered something far more disturbing than I could understand. Who was that person? What did they want? And why had they been so silent, so detached? Eventually, I couldn't stay any longer. My body was trembling, my hands still shaking as I started the car and pulled back onto the road. The desert stretched out endlessly before me, but now it felt suffocating, oppressive. The quiet that had once seemed peaceful now felt like a trap. I couldn't stop looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that person following me, but there was nothing. I drove for hours, hardly stopping, too afraid to rest. The encounter had left me with more questions than answers, a deep unease that settled in my bones. I couldn't explain what had happened or why I felt so certain that something wasn't right, but I couldn't shake the image of that blank, lifeless stare, and I knew I would never feel the same driving through the desert again. Story 20. I pulled into the gas station, the dim lights casting long shadows across the deserted lot. It was past midnight, and the air was cool, with only the sound of the occasional wind rustling the empty bags that had blown across the pavement. I had been driving for hours, the loneliness of the road starting to wear on me. The gas station was my only option for a break, so I figured I'd stretch my legs and grab a drink before hitting the road again. As I got out of the car, I noticed a man walking toward me. He was tall, dressed in a long coat that seemed too heavy for the mild night. His face was hard to make out, but I could tell he was smiling, or at least attempting to. It felt forced, like he was trying to put on a friendly face. "I like your car," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of something I couldn't quite place. His eyes seemed to linger on the car for a second longer than necessary. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. It wasn't unusual for people to make small talk, but something about his presence felt off. I didn't want to seem rude, but I didn't want to engage either. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and locked the car doors, the sound of the locks clicking loud in the quiet night. He didn't seem to mind. In fact, his smile only widened. "You should have locked them sooner," he said with a low chuckle. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. There was a strange familiarity in his tone, almost as if he knew something I didn't. I glanced around the empty gas station lot, feeling the weight of his words hang in the air. He wasn't near enough to be threatening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too close for comfort. I took a step back, trying to keep the distance between us. "I'm just getting something from inside," I muttered, not looking him directly in the eyes. I didn't want to engage further, but his presence was suffocating, making it hard to focus on anything else. I reached for my phone, hoping to look busy, but I couldn't stop glancing at him. He was still standing there, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never leaving me. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you," he said suddenly, his voice lowering to a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, staring at him in disbelief. Why would he say that? My hand hesitated over the door handle, unsure if I should go inside or stay where I was. I glanced at the gas station, the flickering lights above the door casting an eerie glow. It seemed like any other place, but something about it felt wrong. "Why not?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising panic in my chest. His smile widened even more, if that was possible, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. He didn't answer immediately, just stood there watching me with those strange eyes. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck, but I refused to show any fear. "Just a bad feeling," I added, trying to play it off, but his gaze never wavered. "Bad feelings are something you should trust," he replied cryptically, his tone strangely calm. There was no indication of any threat in his voice, yet the words seemed to hang in the air, like a warning. His eyes flickered toward the gas station building, then back at me, almost as if he was daring me to go inside. A sudden chill ran through me, and I looked toward the door of the gas station again, wondering if I should just leave and drive off. I quickly weighed my options. The man was still standing there, but he hadn't moved closer. His words echoed in my mind as I glanced around the empty lot once more. My car felt like a safe distance away, but if I just went inside for a few minutes, would he follow? I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that I was being watched, even though no one else was around. I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't just drive away without filling up. The man was still watching, his eyes locked onto mine as if waiting for me to make my move. After what felt like an eternity, I made a decision. I would fill up the car and then leave. As quickly as possible, I walked toward the pump, trying to keep my movements deliberate, calm. The man didn't move, but I could feel his eyes on me, following my every step. I took my time, pretending to focus on the pump as I filled the tank. When I finally finished, I turned to get back into the car, but before I could open the door, I heard him speak again. "You'll be fine," he said softly, almost too softly, like he knew something I didn't. I didn't reply, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up once again. My fingers fumbled as I reached for the door handle, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not let him see how unnerved I was. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and immediately locked it, not taking my eyes off him. I started the engine, my hands trembling slightly as I shifted into drive. The man stood still, watching me through the window, that same unnerving smile never fading from his face. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting him to be following. But there was nothing, just the empty gas station behind me, bathed in the harsh glow of the lights. The further I drove, the more the incident lingered in my mind. His words kept replaying in my head. His unsettling smile burned into my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had narrowly escaped something much worse. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but I couldn't bring myself to look back, not even once. Story 21. I had been in the market for a second-hand laptop for weeks. My old one had finally given up on me, and after some searching, I found a good deal online. The seller seemed nice enough, offering a reasonable price for a laptop that appeared to be in decent condition. I made the purchase, eager to get it home and set up, and everything seemed fine at first. When I booted it up, the laptop seemed like any other. It was a bit slower than I expected, but nothing unusual. I started by installing the software I needed, setting up my usual apps, and organizing my files. As I went through the laptop, I came across a folder labeled Watch Main in the Documents section. It was an odd name, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably some sort of prank file or leftover from the previous owner. Out of curiosity, I double-clicked the folder. My screen flickered for a moment, and then several video files appeared. They were all named in a similar fashion, timestamps followed by random numbers. I was about to close the folder, thinking it was some sort of strange, useless data left behind by the previous owner, when one of the files began to play automatically. My heart skipped a beat when I realized what was on the screen. The video was of my room. It was the same angle, the same perspective as my desk, but the footage looked like it had been taken in real time. There was no mistaking it. I immediately froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The video feed was live, showing me sitting at my desk in front of the laptop. I looked around the room, my pulse quickening as I realized something was terribly wrong. I quickly slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing with panic. What in the world was going on? Why was there a camera set up in my room? Who had been watching me? I opened the laptop again, and the folder was still there, but this time I was too terrified to click on any of the other files. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the space was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I considered calling the police, but I hesitated. Would they believe me? I had no evidence, just a strange file on a second-hand laptop. I didn't even know where to begin. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing thoughts, I heard the distinct sound of a click from somewhere nearby. My head whipped around, and my eyes scanned the room. It was the sound of a camera, the kind of sound you hear when a lens shifts or adjusts. I could feel my stomach drop as I realized the terrifying possibility. The camera wasn't in the laptop. It was in my room. I stood up, shaking, and began inspecting every corner of the room. I moved furniture, checked under the desk, and scanned every nook and cranny for a hidden camera. But there was nothing. No sign of any device, no wires, no cameras. Yet the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I couldn't explain it, but I knew deep down that something was there, something that I couldn't see. I decided to go back to the laptop, the only source of information I had. I opened the Watch main folder again and clicked on another video. This time the footage was of me from outside my window. The angle was different, but the footage was still disturbingly real time. The camera had captured me sitting at my desk in the same spot, but now I could see the faint outline of my figure through the window, in full view of someone standing outside. I slammed the laptop shut again, my mind racing. Someone had been watching me for who knows how long. My thoughts spiraled out of control. How long had this been going on? Who was behind this? Why hadn't I noticed anything? My fingers trembled as I dialed my friend's number, hoping to get some sort of clarity. They answered on the second ring, and I rushed through the details, trying to explain the situation. "Are you sure?" my friend asked, skepticism in their voice. "Maybe it's a prank, something left over from the previous owner. Just delete the files. And if you're really that worried, get the police involved." It made sense, I thought. Maybe it was just a sick joke, an old file that I shouldn't have opened. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but as I sat there, staring at the laptop, I couldn't help but feel like something more sinister was at play. I decided to go through the rest of the files in the folder, hoping to find some kind of clue. I clicked on a file with a timestamp from just a few days ago. This one showed footage of me walking to my kitchen, picking up a glass of water. I paused the video, my stomach twisting into knots. The timestamp was accurate. It was from earlier in the day when I had walked to the kitchen, but I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't noticed anyone in my apartment, and yet someone had been watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. I was no longer alone in my own space. Someone had access to my home, had been watching me, recording me, and I couldn't figure out how. The laptop didn't offer any answers, only more questions. There were no clues about who might be behind it, no signs of a breach in my apartment or online. Just the realization that I had been unknowingly filmed, captured, and watched. I took the laptop and shoved it into my backpack, not even bothering to turn it off. My only thought was to get rid of it, destroy it, throw it away. Anything to keep it out of my life. But as I reached for my coat to leave, I heard a noise. A soft tapping, as if someone was knocking on my door. My blood ran cold as I froze in place, the backpack still in my hand. I slowly made my way to the door, heart hammering in my chest. There was no way anyone else knew about this. There was no way anyone else could have found me. Yet the tap came again, followed by a low voice from the other side. "Let me in." And Story 22. My smart home camera sent me a notification, "Motion detected in your living room." I froze for a moment, staring at the message. I was home alone. There was no reason for the camera to detect any movement. My heart began to race as I thought about the possibilities had I left a window open. Was it just the wind? But then I remembered that I'd locked everything before sitting down to relax. I opened the camera app on my phone, hoping it was a false alarm. The live feed showed my living room in its usual state, nothing out of place. But then, I noticed something strange. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to shift, moving in a way that didn't match the lighting in the house. My breath caught in my throat. I quickly replayed the footage, trying to make sense of it, but the strange movement was still there. It was as if something or someone was standing just outside the camera's view, hiding in the darkness. I stood up, my pulse quickening. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the camera was malfunctioning, or maybe the cat had knocked something over and triggered the motion sensor. But I didn't own a cat, and nothing had been disturbed. The room was still, save for the occasional flicker of the shadows. I walked slowly toward the living room, every sense on high alert. The silence was deafening, and the further I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. As I entered the living room, the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The shadows were now more pronounced, stretching across the floor and the walls. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I told myself it was just my nerves. I checked the windows and doors, everything was secure. Nothing had changed. Still, the feeling of unease refused to leave. I glanced back at the phone, checking the camera feed again. The motion alert was still there. Motion detected in your living room. The message repeated, and the video was still showing the same strange distortion. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light or something more sinister, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. I cautiously moved toward the far side of the room, where the shadows seemed to cluster more densely. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My phone buzzed again, sending a fresh wave of fear through me. Another motion alert. The message was the same, but the camera feed now showed something different. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, was standing by the couch. I gasped, stumbling backward. The figure was tall and indistinct, but there was no mistaking that it was there, in my home, and it was watching me. I backed away slowly, my phone slipping from my trembling hands and crashing onto the floor. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, like it was waiting for something. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. My mind was in overdrive, trying to process what I was seeing. Was I imagining this? Was I losing my mind? I looked around the room, searching for something, anything that could explain the figure. But everything seemed ordinary. The couch was in its usual spot. The TV remote lay untouched on the coffee table. The only thing that was out of place was that figure. I reached for my phone again, forcing my hands to steady. I had to get a better look at it. I tapped the screen to zoom in on the live feed, and as I did, the figure seemed to shrink away, disappearing into the shadows. I blinked, confused. Had it just vanished, or was it still there? Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and the temperature dropped. A cold gust of air swept through the room, despite all the windows being closed. I shivered, my breath visible in the sudden chill. My phone screen flickered too, the image of the living room distorting as though it were malfunctioning. I tried to call the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't dial. I backed away from the phone, the room feeling smaller and more suffocating by the second. It was then that I heard it. A faint rustling sound like footsteps padding across the floor. My breath hitched, and I spun around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but the room was still empty. The rustling stopped as suddenly as it had started. and I was left in a silence that felt even more oppressive than before. I stood frozen, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, until a soft whisper broke through the quiet. "Leave." The voice was faint, barely audible, but unmistakably clear. It was coming from the corner of the room, the same place the figure had stood earlier. My heart hammered in my chest, and I stumbled backward, my mind racing to make sense of everything. The voice sounded distant, like it was being carried on the wind, but there was no wind in the room. Without thinking, I ran. I bolted for the front door, not even caring if I locked it behind me. I just needed to get out, to be anywhere but there. My mind was screaming, but my body was moving on autopilot, driven by pure instinct. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I finally allowed myself to take a breath, my chest heaving with panic. The world outside felt like a relief, a contrast to the suffocating tension of the house. But the question lingered: what had I just experienced? And why had it felt so real? I didn't go back inside that night. I called a friend who insisted on coming over. When we returned to the house together, the living room was completely empty, just as it had been before. The camera was still recording, and the footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. The shadows had disappeared, and the temperature returned to normal. But as I stood there, staring at the blank screen of my phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. Story 23. The static on the baby monitor had been present for weeks, just a faint buzzing noise in the background. I tried adjusting the frequency, moving the monitor around the room, but it was always there, like an annoying hum I couldn't shake. At first, I thought it was just interference, a common issue with electronic devices, but something about the way the static seemed to linger made me uneasy. It wasn't just a random sound, it felt like it was waiting, watching, as if the static had a life of its own. My daughter, Emma, had just turned 6 months old, and I was still getting used to the new routine of sleepless nights and constant worry. The monitor had become my lifeline, allowing me to check on her while she slept in her crib across the room. Every night, I'd hear the familiar buzz of the monitor as I settled into bed, comforting in its presence, knowing I could hear her if she needed me. But one night, the static changed. I woke up in the middle of the night, the room dark and silent, except for the faint crackling from the monitor. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:13 a.m. The house was quiet, and Emma was sound asleep in her crib. I settled back into bed, trying to push aside the unsettling feeling that had crept into my chest. The static sounded louder tonight, almost as if something was getting closer to the monitor. I reached over to adjust the dial, thinking maybe the static was just getting worse. But when I moved the knob, I froze. The static suddenly cut off, replaced by something much more distinct, a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but unmistakable. "I see you." My breath caught in my throat, and my body went rigid. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but the words were clear. My mind raced as I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for the voice to come again. But the static returned instead, filling the room with its low hum. I grabbed the monitor, checking the battery, the connections, everything, but nothing seemed wrong. I wanted to believe it was a malfunction, some glitch in the system. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. The voice was real. All. My hands trembled as I placed the monitor back on the nightstand. I stared at the screen, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. There was nothing unusual about the room, nothing out of place. Emma was still asleep in her crib, completely unaware of the chilling sound I had just heard. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that something was watching us, waiting. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But the voice haunted me, echoing in my mind every time I closed my eyes. I see you. It felt too real, too deliberate. I couldn't ignore it, no matter how hard I tried. The next morning I checked the monitor again, hoping I had just imagined it, hoping the voice wouldn't return. But it did. That evening, when Emma was tucked into bed, I turned the monitor on, and the static greeted me once more. I listened, my ears straining, waiting for any sign of the voice. The minutes passed, and just as I was about to dismiss it, the whisper came again. I see you. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I turned the monitor off, my mind racing. I had no idea what was going on, but I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to figure out who or what was behind this. My first thought was to call the company that made the monitor, but after a quick search online, I discovered other parents had reported similar experiences. Some claimed they had heard the same whispers, others talked about strange voices speaking through the monitor. The idea of something or someone invading our privacy through the device made my skin crawl. I spent the next few nights trying to keep Emma close to me, never letting her out of my sight for too long. But the voice kept coming back, each time more insistent, more disturbing. It was as if whatever it was knew my fear, knew my every move. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the tone. The voice seemed to shift, becoming darker, more menacing. I see you. I'm right here. The whisper would always end with those last few words, sending a wave of terror through me. I finally decided I couldn't take it any longer. I packed up the baby monitor and threw it in the closet, hoping that would solve the problem. But even after it was out of sight, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I could still hear the voice in my head, as clear as if it was right next to me. Every night I would lie in bed, staring at the walls, waiting for the voice to return. It was always there, lurking in the shadows, whispering its chilling words. One night, after what felt like an eternity of sleepless, restless nights, I decided to take action. I called a technician to come to the house, someone who could check the monitor and maybe put my mind at ease. The technician arrived the next day, and I explained everything: the static, the whispers, the voice. He assured me that there was likely a simple explanation, maybe interference from another device nearby. But when he turned on the monitor, something strange happened. The voice returned, louder this time, as if it was taunting us. The technician froze, his face going pale as the words echoed through the room. I see you. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, before quickly turning off the monitor. I've never heard anything like that before, he said, his voice shaking slightly. That night, we moved out. We couldn't stay in the house anymore. The whispers had followed us, and the fear had grown too much to ignore. I left behind the monitor, the house, everything. But even now, years later, I can still hear the voice sometimes, echoing in the silence of the night. I see you. Story 24. My phone kept ringing from a blocked number. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just a telemarketer or some random spam call. But it kept happening over and over, until I couldn't stand it anymore. I was alone in my apartment on a quiet evening, and the ringing felt intrusive, as though it was demanding my attention. I picked up the phone, half expecting to hear the usual robotic sales pitch, but instead, a voice spoke immediately. Stop ignoring me. It was calm, almost too calm, like someone who knew me well. My heart dropped into my stomach as I stared at the screen. There was no name attached to the call, just the blankness of a blocked number. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaky. My mind raced through all the possibilities: someone I knew playing a joke, a wrong number, maybe even a prank caller. But the voice on the other end didn't give me any clues. It just repeated, "Stop ignoring me." I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't recognize the voice. It didn't sound familiar in the least. It wasn't someone I had ever spoken to, not that I could remember anyway. My mind was starting to whirl with confusion and fear, and my hands tightened around the phone as I waited for the next words. I tried to speak again. "Who are you?" But the voice didn't respond to my question. Instead, it said, "You're not supposed to ignore me." The words felt oddly personal, as though the person knew something about me that I didn't. My mind raced. Had I met someone recently? Had I forgotten a conversation and encounter? The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. A few moments passed in silence before I heard the voice again, but this time it sounded slightly different, as though it was closer to the phone. "I know where you are," it whispered, the words cutting through the air like ice. I froze. My stomach dropped into my feet. There was no way anyone could know where I was unless they were right outside my apartment. I glanced out the window, but there was nothing, just the empty street lit by streetlights. I quickly ended the call and tried to shake off the growing panic. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. Was it just some sick prank? Was someone messing with me? But the voice had felt too real, too unsettling, for it to be a joke. I tried calling back, thinking I could at least figure out who was behind it, but the number was unreachable. I called my friend, but when I told her about the call, she didn't seem as concerned as I felt. "Maybe it's just some weirdo," she said, trying to brush it off. But it wasn't just a random call. It felt personal, too personal. The next few hours passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I checked my phone, I half expected another call. But it didn't ring again that night. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just an odd coincidence, but the unsettling feeling lingered, hovering over me like a storm cloud. The following morning, I went about my usual routine, trying to distract myself from the creeping anxiety. But as I stepped out the door to leave for work, I noticed something strange. There was a note stuck to the windshield of my car. I pulled it off, unfolding the paper with trembling hands. It was simple, handwritten in dark ink, "I'm still waiting." I dropped the note, my heart pounding as I scanned the parking lot. No one was around. It was completely empty, as though the world had gone silent just for me. I got in my car quickly, slamming the door and locking it. The thought that someone had been close enough to leave the note on my car was enough to send a wave of dread over me. At work, I tried to push the incident to the back of my mind, but the feeling of being watched never left. My phone remained quiet, but every time it rang, I flinched, my nerves on edge. Lunchtime came and went, and I tried to focus on the task at hand, but every noise, every shadow, seemed amplified. It felt as though someone was standing right behind me, waiting for me to turn around. That evening, when I returned home, I found another note on my doorstep. This one was different, more urgent. "I'm not done with you," it read, in the same dark, jagged handwriting. I felt a wave of panic surge through me as I looked around the empty street. Was someone following me? Had they been in my apartment while I was gone? I called the police that night, explaining the phone call and the strange notes. They assured me that they would look into it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on my own. As I sat in my apartment, the darkness pressing in around me, I realized that I had no idea who this person was or why they were doing this. Days passed, and the calls continued, though I never answered them. Each time, the same voice would say, "Stop ignoring me." The notes kept appearing, always in new places: my car, my mailbox, my doorstep. I stopped going out at night, afraid to be alone. I didn't know who this person was or what they wanted, but their presence was like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. It wasn't until weeks later, when I received another call, that I finally heard something different. This time, when the voice spoke, it said, "You don't remember me, do you?" The words were like a cold hand on my chest, and for the first time I felt like I was truly being hunted. Story 25. I was on a long road trip, and after several hours of driving, I stopped at a small rest area to stretch my legs. The place was quiet, with only a few cars parked along the lot. The restroom was tucked in the back corner of the area, its exterior looking worn and faded, as if it hadn't been updated in years. I didn't think much of it, just eager to get in and out as quickly as possible, so I headed inside. The restroom was eerily empty, the lights flickering overhead and the smell of stale air filling the small space. I quickly went to the sink to wash my hands, trying not to focus too much on the peeling paint and cracked tiles around me. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye: a small USB drive lying on the ground near the trash can. I bent down to pick it up, unsure of what I expected to find, but curiosity got the better of me. I pocketed it, wondering if it was lost or if someone had accidentally dropped it. Once I was back in my car, I stared at the USB drive in my hand. The thought of plugging it into my laptop was tempting, but the rational part of me told me it was a bad idea. What if it was someone's private information? What if it was dangerous, infected with a virus? Despite these thoughts, the part of me that craved answers won out. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After a moment's hesitation, I plugged the drive into the USB port. The drive mounted, and an icon appeared on my desktop. I clicked on it, and a folder opened. Inside was a single file labeled video. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know why, but something about the whole situation felt off. I clicked on the video and my screen flickered for a moment before it began to play. At first, I saw nothing but a blurry image in an indistinct room, dimly lit. The sound was muffled, but as the camera focused, I realized it was a view of the public restroom where I had just been. I could see the sink, the same cracked tiles, and the flickering lights overhead. My heart started to race, and I leaned closer to the screen, trying to understand what was happening. Why was there footage of the restroom on this drive? Then the camera shifted, and I saw myself entering the restroom. I froze in place, staring at the screen in disbelief. There I was, walking through the door just as I had done earlier, wearing the same clothes, looking the same. The video had been taken just moments before. My stomach churned as I realized this footage was from right before I had picked up the USB drive. The video continued. It showed me walking over to the sink, washing my hands just as I had done in real life. But the camera didn't stop there. It followed my every move, capturing me from angles I didn't remember. The video seemed to linger on my back for longer than necessary, zooming in on my face, my posture, even the way my hair fell across my shoulders. I was being watched, filmed in a place I thought was private. I tried to convince myself that it was just some random footage, a coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The camera angle shifted again, and I could now see someone else's shadow moving just outside the frame. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively reached for my phone, but I was too transfixed by the screen to even dial. The figure in the video moved closer, and it wasn't until the figure was almost at the door that I realized what it was: someone standing there, watching me. The camera flicked to the outside of the restroom, showing a figure in a dark hoodie, their face hidden in shadow, standing just out of sight of the camera. The video abruptly cut off. There was no sound, no more movement, just the haunting silence that hung in the air. I sat frozen, staring at the blank screen, my mind racing. Who was that person? Why was I being filmed? And most importantly, how did they have access to footage of me in real time? My fingers shook as I unplugged the USB drive, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm myself down, but the eerie feeling of being watched didn't fade. I kept thinking about that person in the video, how they were just outside, waiting, watching me. The rest area had seemed so quiet, so peaceful when I first arrived. Now it felt like a trap, a place where someone had been lurking in the shadows, collecting footage of unsuspecting travelers. I glanced at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the reflection, but there was nothing. I debated going back to the restroom to check for any signs of someone being there, but something inside me told me to leave. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to get out of there, to drive as far away from that rest area as possible. My mind raced as I drove off, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. What had I just seen? What was the purpose of the footage? And why was it on a USB drive left in a public restroom? I didn't stop for gas or food until I was well past the rest area, a good few miles down the road. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror, I half expected to see the same figure following me. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, but I couldn't. The image of the person standing just outside the restroom door haunted me. When I finally reached a nearby town, I decided I couldn't keep the USB drive anymore. I found a public computer and plugged it in, ready to delete everything. But when I opened the file again, the video had changed. Instead of showing the footage of me entering the restroom, it now showed a map, my location pinpointed on it, with a blinking red dot right where I had parked earlier. It was the first sign I'd seen that someone somewhere was tracking me. I felt my heart race as I slammed the drive back into my bag. I didn't know who was watching me or why they had this footage, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone in this. Someone was out there, and they knew exactly where I was. Story 26. I had been looking forward to my weekend getaway for months. After weeks of long hours at work, I needed a break, so I rented a cozy-looking Airbnb cabin tucked away in a quiet part of the woods. The listing had glowing reviews, the pictures looked charming, and the price was right, so I thought it was the perfect escape from the chaos of everyday life. However, from the moment I arrived, something felt off. The cabin was nestled in a secluded area, far from the nearest neighbor, and while the surroundings were picturesque, there was an eerie quiet that seemed to follow me. The air felt heavier than usual, and the silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of trees in the breeze, made me uneasy. It wasn't anything obvious. There were no strange noises or visible signs of anything out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely alone in the cabin. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. As the night went on, my unease grew. The cabin had an old charm to it, with creaky floorboards and dim lighting that gave off a slightly haunted vibe. I made dinner, turned on the TV, and settled in for the evening, hoping to relax. But every time I moved around the space, I felt like I was being watched. It was subtle at first, just a creeping sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Eventually, I decided to call it a night and went to bed, trying to dismiss the feeling as nothing more than my overactive imagination. I tossed and turned throughout the night, unable to fall into a deep sleep. The bed was comfortable enough, but the strange feeling never left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard a faint noise, footsteps outside the door, the creak of a floorboard. I would sit up, my heart pounding in my chest, but each time I opened my eyes there was nothing. The house was still, too still, as if the world outside had stopped moving. It was a restless night, and I woke up the next morning exhausted and on edge. The sun was shining when I finally got out of bed, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I decided to shake off my discomfort and take a walk around the cabin to clear my mind. The surrounding woods were beautiful, the birds chirping in the distance, but no matter where I went, my thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin. When I returned, I took a quick shower, hoping the cold water would wake me up and help me start fresh for the day. That's when I noticed something strange. While I was drying off, I glanced up at the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was an older model, the kind with a small circular lens in the center. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I noticed a tiny glint of something reflecting in the light. My stomach dropped as I realized that the lens wasn't just a part of the smoke detector, it was a camera. My heart began to race as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no way I could have missed it the night before, but now, in the daylight, it was impossible to ignore. I walked over to the smoke detector and stood on tiptoe to get a closer look. The tiny camera was cleverly hidden, almost invisible if you weren't specifically looking for it. It was so small that it could easily be mistaken for a part of the smoke detector itself. But now that I saw it, I couldn't look away. A cold chill crept down my spine as the implications of what I was seeing started to sink in. Someone had been watching me the entire time I was in the cabin. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. I had rented this place in good faith, thinking it was a peaceful escape. But now I realized that someone had been violating my privacy. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. I had no idea how long the camera had been there, or who was on the other end of it. What disturbed me even more was that I hadn't noticed it before. The night had been filled with strange feelings, yes, but I never once suspected that I was being filmed. It made everything feel more sinister, like I had been walking around blindfolded in my own home. I quickly grabbed my phone and checked the Airbnb listing again, hoping I might find some clue about the host. But the name was generic, and the photos didn't provide any additional information. I searched online for reviews, trying to find any mention of odd occurrences or previous guests who might have noticed something suspicious, but nothing came up. It felt like I had stumbled into a nightmare where I couldn't trust anyone. I thought about leaving immediately, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was just a mistake. But even as I tried to reason with myself, the unease only grew. I couldn't stop thinking about the camera. I wondered how many other guests had stayed there, unaware of the hidden lens that had been spying on them. I felt violated, as if someone had been watching my every move, listening to my conversations, even though I hadn't given anyone permission to do so. I took a deep breath and called Airbnb's support line, trying to stay calm as I explained the situation. The person on the other end was apologetic, that they couldn't offer me much help over the phone. They promised to contact the host and launch an investigation, but I didn't feel reassured. As I stood there, staring at the camera, I realized that the damage had already been done. I couldn't trust that the footage wasn't being watched or recorded. I couldn't trust the people behind the listing, and I certainly didn't feel safe in the cabin anymore. Without wasting any more time, I packed my things and left the cabin, not even bothering to stay another night. As I drove away, I felt a mix of anger and fear swirling inside me. I couldn't shake the image of that tiny camera, so small and hidden, but so powerful in its ability to invade my privacy. I vowed never to stay at another Airbnb inn and couldn't help but wonder how many other unsuspecting guests had experienced the same violation. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, but instead, it had turned into a nightmare. Story 27. I was on my usual late-night drive home from work, the roads empty and the soft hum of the car engine filling the quiet. The Bluetooth in my car connected automatically as it always did, but this time something was different. A strange notification popped up on the screen, one that I didn't recognize. The message read, "You should check your back seat." I glanced at the screen, unsure if it was some sort of malfunction. It couldn't be a prank. Who would be messing with my car's Bluetooth this late at night? My heart started to race as I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I thought about pulling over and checking the back seat, but the message felt like it had come from nowhere, and the thought of stopping in the dark, isolated road only made me more uncomfortable. The car seemed to hum louder now, the silence between me and the strange message stretching far too long. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Was it some glitch? A malfunction? Or worse, was someone in the car with me? I glanced at the rearview mirror, but nothing looked out of place. The seats were empty, the car as it should be. But the message lingered in my mind like a cold whisper, unsettling and impossible to ignore. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that it was just a mistake, that it was nothing more than a technical glitch. The more I tried to ignore it, though, the more paranoid I became. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting behind me, their face obscured in the shadows. The road seemed darker now, the streetlights ahead casting eerie, long shadows across the pavement. I couldn't help myself anymore. I needed to check, to make sure there was nothing to worry about. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I slowed the car down, looking for a place to pull over. There was a small side street coming up, barely lit by a few scattered streetlights. I took the turn without thinking, parking under one of the flickering lights, heart pounding in my chest. The moment I stopped the car, I turned off the engine and sat there in the sudden silence, listening for any sound, anything that might explain the strange message. The Bluetooth screen still displayed the ominous words, and I felt the chill of the night air creeping in through the slightly cracked window. I could hear my breath shallow and quick, the weight of the message pressing on me like a heavy hand. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle, but I hesitated. What if someone really was in the back seat? The thought seemed irrational, but the dread was undeniable. I quickly turned around, my eyes scanning the back of the car. The seats were still empty. No one was there, nothing out of the ordinary. But that wasn't enough to calm my racing heart. I glanced at the screen again, the message still there, still taunting me with its simple words, "You should check your back seat." My fingers hovered over the Bluetooth button, trying to disconnect the device, but it wouldn't respond. It was as if the message had control of my car's system, refusing to let go. Suddenly I heard an almost imperceptible rustling sound coming from the back. My head snapped around, eyes wide, searching for the source. The car was still and silent, but that noise, faint but unmistakable, was enough to send my adrenaline into overdrive. I reached for the door again, my body frozen with fear, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. What if I was wrong? What if something or someone was waiting just outside? I looked at the back seat once more, then back to the screen. The message hadn't changed. It was still there, hanging in front of me like a warning. My breathing grew shallow as I debated what to do next. Every instinct told me to get out of the car, to run, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Slowly, I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, dialing a friend's number without thinking. The phone rang 3 times before my friend picked up, her voice groggy with sleep. I didn't even know what to say. I just blurted out, "Someone's in my car." I don't know what to do. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear her trying to process my words. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Check your back seat." The words were like a slap to my face, and I jumped, my heart thudding wildly in my chest. I already did," I stammered. "There's nothing there, but the message keeps telling me to check." My voice cracked, and I felt the fear surge up again, choking me. My friend was quiet for a moment before responding. "Look, you need to trust your gut. If something feels off, get out of there. Don't wait around." I nodded, although she couldn't see me. I disconnected the call and stared at the screen again. The message was gone now, but the sense of dread had only intensified. Slowly, I reached for the door handle and opened it, the cool night air rushing in. I stepped out, my hands trembling as I walked to the back of the car. I opened the trunk instead, wanting to make sure nothing was hidden in there. My mind raced as I pulled back the cover, but the trunk was empty, nothing out of the ordinary. When I turned back around, I saw it, a faint silhouette in the rearview mirror, a shape that hadn't been there moments before. I turned, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the parking lot was completely empty. For a long moment I just stood there, the cold night air settling around me, and I realized with sickening certainty that I wasn't alone. Someone had been watching me from the shadows, and they were still out there. I could feel it. Story 28. I had never been much of a fan of dating apps, but after some gentle encouragement from friends, I decided to give it a try. I created a profile, filled in some basic information about myself, and uploaded a few photos from trips and outings. The idea of meeting new people, even if it was just through messages at first, felt exciting but intimidating. I told myself it would be a fun experiment, nothing too serious. Within a few hours, my phone buzzed with a new match. Her profile was simple, but there was something in her bio that caught my attention. A shared interest in books, an appreciation for good coffee, and a love for quiet afternoons in nature. I sent her a message, introducing myself casually, but the response came faster than I expected. "Nice blue shirt," her message said. I stared at it for a moment, unsure how to respond. I was wearing a blue shirt at the time, but there was no way she could have known that from my profile. It had no photos of me in a blue shirt, just the casual pictures I'd uploaded from different outings. My mind started to race. Was it just a lucky guess? Or was there something else going on here? I typed a quick reply, trying to brush off the unease that crept up on me. "Thanks. But I'm curious, how did you know I was wearing a blue shirt?" I hit send, almost immediately regretting it. Maybe I was overthinking things. It was probably just a coincidence, a harmless icebreaker. Her reply came within seconds. "Just a hunch." I felt my stomach twist. A hunch? I stared at the message, feeling a strange chill run down my spine. The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. How could she know what I was wearing? The app didn't have access to my camera, and I hadn't shared any details about my outfit. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. I had only just met this person, and it was possible she had made a lucky guess. After all, blue was a fairly common color, right? But still, the coincidence felt too strange to ignore. A few minutes later, I received another message. You look good in blue. It brings out your eyes. I sat frozen for a moment. How did she know what my eyes looked like? My profile didn't have any close-up photos of my face, only a few full-body shots taken at a distance. I felt a growing sense of discomfort wash over me. I wasn't sure how to respond anymore. At that moment, I decided to take a break from the conversation. I needed to clear my head and figure out what was going on. I walked away from my phone and tried to focus on something else. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling the whole situation became. It didn't make sense. Who was this person, and how did they know so much about me? A few hours later, I gathered the courage to check the app again. To my surprise, there was another message waiting for me. I hope you're not mad at me. I just thought you should know I've been watching you for a while. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Watching me, what did that mean? My mind raced, trying to process what I had just read. I scrolled through the messages again, looking for anything that could explain what was happening. The previous message had been odd, but this one took things to a whole new level. I didn't know how to respond. What if this person was stalking me? Or worse, what if they knew where I lived? I immediately went to the app's settings and checked the privacy options. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickly blocked the person, hoping to put an end to the unsettling experience. But as I went to do so, I noticed something even more disturbing. The profile picture of the person I had been talking to was gone. It had been there earlier, just a simple photo of a woman standing in front of a coffee shop. Now it was just a blank silhouette. I double-checked, convinced I was seeing things, but it was still gone. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This was no coincidence. I took a deep breath and reported the profile to the app's support team. It was unsettling enough to have someone send me such strange, invasive messages, but to find that they had disappeared entirely made everything feel even more off. I didn't know if this person was using a fake account or if they had somehow hacked into the system, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to risk it anymore. The next few days passed in a blur, my mind constantly replaying the strange conversation. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even when I was doing something as mundane as walking to the grocery store or sitting in a cafe. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone staring at me. I never returned to the dating app, and I deleted my profile altogether. I couldn't bring myself to go back, not after what had happened. The whole experience left me shaken, questioning everything about online interactions. I had been careful, I thought, but someone had still found a way to slip through the cracks. I'm not sure if I'll ever truly understand what happened that day or if it was just an eerie coincidence, but the unsettling feeling that someone had been watching me, even before I'd ever met them, lingers in my mind. And no matter how hard I try to forget, I'll never be able to shake the memory of that strange message. Nice blue shirt. Story 29. It was just another routine subway ride, the kind where you'd get on, find a seat, and zone out until you reached your destination. The train car was crowded, filled with commuters glued to their phones or staring absent-mindedly out the window. I had my headphones in, music playing softly in my ears as I leaned back against the cool metal of the seat. The rattle of the train on the tracks was the only sound besides the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. The train made its usual stops, picking up and dropping off passengers at each station, but my mind was far away. I was distracted by the flashing screen of my phone, scrolling through emails and checking social media. A sudden notification appeared at the top of my screen, an airdrop alert. At first, I barely registered it, thinking it was just another random photo from someone nearby. I didn't think much of it, as I had received airdrops from strangers before, people on the subway often sending funny or strange pictures. Curious, I tapped the notification to see what the photo was. My heart skipped a beat as the image loaded on my screen. It was a picture of me taken just moments before. The photo wasn't one I had taken myself, nor had anyone else been around me to snap it. The angle was perfect, showing me sitting in my seat with my headphones in, eyes fixed forward. It was almost as if the person who took the photo had been standing directly in front of me, hidden from my view. I froze, staring at the photo. My pulse began to quicken, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. The photo was undeniably recent, with the details of the train car and my exact position confirming it had been taken only seconds ago. I quickly glanced around the crowded car, scanning the faces of the people around me, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. But everyone was absorbed in their own little worlds, some with their heads buried in phones, others lost in thought. No one seemed to notice me, and I felt a growing sense of unease settle in. I couldn't understand how this could have happened. I hadn't seen anyone take a picture of me, and there was no reason for anyone to. The stranger who had sent the photo wasn't someone I knew, nor had I seen their name pop up on the airdrop notification. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just a prank or a mistake, but the unsettling feeling only grew. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of it. Who would want to send me a photo of myself? And why? The photo wasn't the only thing that bothered me. There was something about it, something subtle, that made me feel even more unsettled. I zoomed in on the image, looking at the details more closely. In the background, just beyond my shoulder, I could make out a figure. The face wasn't clear, but it was there, lurking in the shadows. A shadowy silhouette of a person, standing just out of view of the camera. My stomach twisted as I wondered how long they had been there. Had they been there the whole time? I felt my hands start to shake as I quickly deleted the airdrop notification, trying to force the thought out of my mind. But it was too late. The feeling of being watched was now a reality. The figure in the background, just the suggestion of someone hiding, felt like it was still there, in the shadows of my mind, lurking. I looked around the train again, more frantically this time. Could someone have been standing behind me, snapping pictures? Was there a hidden camera? My thoughts spiraled as I grew more and more anxious. The train slowed as it approached the next station, and I watched the doors open, revealing a few passengers waiting to board. I considered getting off at the next stop, just to break the tension and get away from this eerie feeling. But the thought of stepping off the train, only to have someone follow me, made me hesitate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that someone was watching me from just out of sight. I turned my attention back to my phone, hoping to distract myself, but my thoughts were racing. Suddenly, I received another notification. My heart skipped a beat, and I opened it without thinking. Another airdrop, this time with no message, just a picture. My hands trembled as the photo appeared on the screen. It was the same image as before, the one of me sitting in the seat, headphones in, lost in my own world. But this time, the figure in the background was clearer. The shape of the person was more defined, and they seemed to be getting closer, almost as if they were inching toward me in the frame. I glanced around again, my mind screaming for some kind of reassurance, but all I saw were more strangers, unaware of the unsettling scene unfolding in my head. The train was packed, and I felt more alone than ever. I looked down at my phone, almost paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. Should I report this? Should I confront the person who was sending these photos? But how could I even begin to know who that was? They were invisible, hidden in plain sight, just like the figure in the photo. I decided to get off at the next stop, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. As the train pulled into the station, I stood up and moved toward the door, trying to act calm and collected. My heart raced in my chest, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching me. When the doors opened, I quickly stepped off the train, my mind still reeling from what had happened. I stood on the platform for a moment, taking in the busy station around me. The world seemed normal, bustling with commuters, but my mind was far from at ease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone was still watching me. I checked my phone again, but there were no new notifications. It was like the entire incident had vanished. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't forget the photo or the shadowy figure creeping in the background. Story 30. It was just another typical night in my apartment when I noticed the alert on my phone. The security camera app pinged me with a new notification. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a second before opening it. As the video loaded, I frowned at the image that appeared on my screen. A man, standing perfectly still in front of the building, stared directly at the camera. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking, and wasn't even trying to get in, just standing there, smiling. At first I thought it was a glitch, maybe a weird angle or a trick of the light. The man's face was distorted in the dark, but the smile was unmistakable. It wasn't a friendly, casual smile. It was wide, unnerving, and far too still for comfort. I brushed off the initial wave of unease. Maybe it was a neighbor who had stopped by to check something, or even someone who had gotten the wrong apartment. Still, the longer I stared at the video, the more it felt wrong. There was something off about it. I figured it couldn't hurt to check. I went to my window, pulled the blinds aside, and scanned the parking lot below. The man wasn't there. The area was empty, like it had been when I first arrived home hours earlier. Relieved, I convinced myself that I had overthought things. Maybe it was just a random passerby in a hood or someone with too much time on their hands. I settled back on the couch, though a part of me couldn't shake the image of that smile from my mind. I tried to go back to my evening routine, watching TV, scrolling through my phone, anything to distract me. But I kept thinking about the man. Something about the way he stood there, staring, seemed deliberate. It was as if he knew I was watching. I kept checking the security footage, hoping the moment would pass. But every time I opened the app, the same unsettling video appeared. He hadn't moved, still staring at the camera as though time had frozen. The hours dragged on, and I couldn't help but feel that the presence outside my apartment was growing more sinister. I checked the video again, and he was still there. My heart began to race. The man's smile hadn't faded. There was something disturbing about it, like he was enjoying the discomfort he was causing. He never tried to open the door or knock on the window. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for me to do something, to make a move. I called the police, though I felt ridiculous as I explained the situation. "There's a man outside my apartment," I said, my voice trembling. "He's just standing there, staring at my security camera. He hasn't moved for hours." The officer on the other end didn't sound convinced. "Are you sure he's still there?" he asked. "Could be some prank, or maybe someone just passing through. It's probably nothing." He assured me someone would come by to check, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. I hung up, feeling both relieved and unsettled. I sat in the dark, watching the camera feed. It was just past midnight now, and the world outside seemed eerily silent. The man was still there. He hadn't moved an inch. The longer I stared at him through the video, the more surreal the situation became. Why was he doing this? Why hadn't he left? I tried to shake the anxiety creeping up my spine, telling myself that I was overreacting, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. No one just stands there for hours without reason. I decided to check again. Maybe he had finally left, or maybe I was just imagining things. When I opened the app, I saw his face again, just as I had before. But this time his expression had changed. The smile was still there, but his eyes, they were different. His pupils were unnaturally wide, as if he were staring through the camera itself. It was like he knew I was watching, and the thought sent chills down my spine. I quickly locked the doors and double-checked the windows, though I already knew it wouldn't do much if he decided to force his way in. An hour passed, and the man still hadn't moved. I was starting to feel the weight of his presence, even from behind the screen. The strange thing was that no one else had passed by. There were no other cars in the parking lot, no pedestrians, nothing. Just him, still standing there motionless, with that unsettling smile plastered across his face. I glanced at the time. It had been hours. It had to be nearly 3 in the morning now. Suddenly I heard a noise. It was faint but distinct, coming from the hallway outside my apartment. I froze, my eyes darting to the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Was it him? Had he somehow gotten in? I waited in the silence, the minutes stretching on with unbearable tension. But the sound didn't come again. I waited a little longer, too afraid to move. I decided to take one last look at the camera feed before doing anything else. To my horror, the man was no longer standing in front of the camera. Instead, the camera view was filled with nothing but darkness. He had moved, but I couldn't tell where. He was still there, just out of sight. A cold sweat began to form on my skin as panic surged through me. I quickly checked the locks again, making sure everything was secure. Then I saw it. A flash of movement in the corner of the camera's view, just a blur. The man wasn't outside anymore. His face was now right up against the lens. His wide, unsettling smile was the only thing visible in the feed, his eyes locked onto the camera. I could barely breathe as I watched the screen. He was so close now. It was as if he was right outside my door. I felt like I couldn't escape the suffocating gaze that stared back at me from the screen. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever. I wasn't sure what to do. The man never knocked, never attempted to enter my apartment. He just stared, that unblinking smile the only sign of life from outside. Finally, I turned off the screen and sat in the dark, waiting for the police to arrive. But by the time they did, the man was gone, and I never saw him again.